Good morning to all attending the RTA's meeting of the Board of Directors. I want to review a few guidelines for today's meeting before we begin. For the members who are here in person, thank you as always for your great attendance. Please turn your microphones on when you wish to speak and off when you are finished so that we limit the microphones that are on at any one given time. I will call on those with questions or comments for those attending in person. For those calling in remotely, keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which impairs the recording, which we do of each of our meetings. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand. The board secretary will call on board members who have raised their hand one at a time. When she calls on your hand, try to lower your hand and remember to do that and unmute yourself before speaking. With that now said, I'll officially call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order. I want to welcome a new member, John Rotondo is a new member from a great member appointed by the County Board Chairwoman Deb Conroy of DuPage County. He'll be replacing Director Andalcio, who I thank for his years of service on the board. And John, welcome very much, and just introduce yourself and tell us what you do on outside of the RTA.
Good morning. Thank you for that kind welcome, Chairman Dillard. My name is John Rotondo, and I'm with LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America, Chicagoland Laborers District Council Training and Apprenticeship Fund, where I serve as the director of the apprenticeship program, training construction craft laborers in the Chicagoland area, which covers 9 counties. Happy to be here today. I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude to be serving on such a great board with such amazing individuals. And I hope to learn and collaborate together and get to know each and every one of you and learn from you all. It's my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. You're a great addition to our board. As you'll find out, we have lots of labor issues, so your expertise on those issues will be very useful to us. And we always preach that working for Metra or CTA or PACE are great career opportunities for young people, of which you have a particular affinity for, training folks for the trades. And so you're a great new addition to our board, and welcome. We're very privileged to have you. With that, let's take a moment, as we always do, and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I wish we could play the Star Spangled Banner like at the Olympics. I got used to seeing that. It was kind of nice. In fact, it was very moving. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Good morning. Director Carey? Here. Director Colson? Here. Director Fuentes? No, he's on.
I'm sorry?
Just calling the roll, Director Fuentes.
Oh, okay.
You're up.
Oh, here.
Director Gavin?
Here.
Dr. Gorman, I believe she'll be calling in a little while. Dr. Groven?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Dr. Melvin? Director Pang? Director Rotondo?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Sager?
Here.
Dr. Yonan?
Here.
And Chairman Dillard.
Present. I think Director Gorman will join us by phone. She had a family medical emergency this morning, but Liz is a trooper, and I think she'll join us by phone in just a little bit. Item 3 is the approval of the minutes from our board meeting held on June 20th of 2024. Any comments or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, how about a motion and a second to approve? Director Carey moves we approve, seconded by Director Lewis, that we approve the minutes from June 20th of 2024. And Madam Secretary, please take a roll call.
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson? Dr. Fuentes,
Aye.
Dr. Gathing,
Aye.
Dr. Groven,
Aye.
Dr. Lewis,
Aye.
Dr. Melvin, Dr. Pang, Dr. Rotundo,
Aye.
Dr. Ross,
Aye.
Dr. Sagar,
Yes.
Dr. Yonan,
Aye.
and Chairman Dillard.
Yes,
12 yes.
thank you. Hearing the voice of Dr. Sagar, was at the State Fair on Tuesday, and as you know, he's the livestock superintendent of the Illinois State Fair. So I'm going through the swine barn or looking at the barrows, the champion ones, and who is there but our wonderful, I call him our Renaissance man director, doing his job so well with agriculture in the state of Illinois, which is the largest industry, largest GDP producer, agribusiness in the state of Illinois. Even though we're up here in Cook County, we forget that agribusiness and agriculture is the state's largest industry. And it was great to see Dr. Sagar wearing a different hat than just his transit hat or mayoral hat, Director Carey. So, Brian, it's good to have you, and thanks for joining us from the very busy Illinois State Fair.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chairman.
Thank you. It was great to see you. Item 4 is the public comments section of our meeting today. Any comments that we've received will be read into the record. We have any, Joey?
We have not received any.
Excellent. And anybody in the audience wishing to give testimony today? Seeing none, we will move on to item 5, and that's the Executive Director's Report. Leanne Redden. Good morning, Leanne.
Good morning, Chairman Dillard, members of the board, and guests who are either in person or listening in. We also welcome Jim Dewinski from Metra. But before we get to Jim, I just want to give you a couple of updates on a few things to share with you at the top of our transit is the answer implementation item update, which is item 6D on today's agenda. First, but before I do that, I want to update you on our response to the public comment that we received at the last board meeting on prioritizing transit on North DuSable Lakeshore Drive. As you know, we are partnering with roadway agencies to build a transit-friendly streets, and advanced bus rapid transit is one of the key tenets of our region's strategic plan and part of our advocacy agenda. We believe that this is particular importance when we look at the rebuild of North DuSable Lakeshore Drive, which is a regionally significant project and a critical transit corridor for tens of thousands of bus riders here in the city. This rebuild is a once in a lifetime or once in every 50-year opportunity to redesign this iconic street in our city and really match our region's priorities around equity, combating climate change, and improving the quality of life, as well as access to transit for all residents. And therefore, we feel strongly that transit must be prioritized by providing at least one bus priority lane in any future plans. Following that June meeting and public comments that we received there, we sent a letter to the Chicago Department of Transportation and IDOT stating our recommendation that any plans for rebuild of the drive should include at least one transit priority lane. And a copy of that letter is linked to your agenda today. It's also available and posted on our website. The project team, however, indicated at the task force meeting in July that they are recommending the essential alternative, which is very limited bus priority on entry and exit ramps along the drive. A public meeting was held last week, and the project team received strong opposition to that recommendation. We will continue to make sure that both highway agencies are aware of our recommendation and our strong preference for prioritized bus lanes on the drive, and will offer our assistance in that process to reach an appropriate record of decision before they move further into any design phases of that project. I also want to give you an update on a funding opportunity that we mentioned to you back in April. When we applied for a $375 million in climate pollution reduction grant from the federal EPA, and it was intended to fund zero and reduced emission vehicles and infrastructure across all 3 service boards. That was a big buildup. So unfortunately, we learned this month that we did not receive that funding. You may have heard, though, that the state of Illinois did receive $430 million as part of that program that will go to non-transit related climate reduction activities. Nationally, no major transit initiatives were funded as part of this year's grants. But we have met with EPA to discuss our proposal, and in doing so, I think we picked up some really valuable insights as, ways to make our future applications stronger and more competitive. So we will continue to pursue that. Just a quick look at today's agenda. As I mentioned, first you're going to hear from Metra and Jim Dewinski, but we have, and we've asked them here to be part of an effort to essentially hear from each of the service boards prior to the full real budget conversations that we get into. We wanted to provide an opportunity for each agency to discuss their larger plans and visions or specific projects that will impact their budget prior to meeting with you and really help you and the public stay informed, not just about the dollars and the amounts of money that are being spent that make up our regional budget, but really about the intentions and the outcomes that they are all striving towards and how they will meaningfully impact the region. We have asked the CTA and PACE to provide similar presentations over the following 2 months as well. After we hear from Metra, we'll continue with the agenda, including a Citizens Advisory Board update from Jackie Forbes. The staff will also present the 2024 Community Planning Program of projects, and then we'll have a 3-part update on the implementation progress on Transit is the Answer. Then we'll ask for your vote on several following items: the quarterly performance reports and the certifications of the financials for the second quarter of this year. Ordinance setting funding amounts for 2025 through 27 operating budgets and the preliminary 2025-29 capital program. And then there'll be several contracts we're looking for your approval on legislative consulting, creative services, text, subscriptions and supplies, and some mobile devices and services. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will answer any questions, but turn it back to you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Leanne? Just on bus rapid transit, I'm looking at today's papers, there's more media coverage on the DeSable Lakeshore Drive north end project. At Friday's Senate Transportation Committee hearing in Naperville, lots of discussion. There was a rally that was held on last Thursday by advocates, including a great presentation by Senator Michael Simmons, who I think hopefully can get through to both CDOT and IDOT about the importance of putting a bus rapid transit line or lane on North Lakeshore Drive. I mean, this is a 50 or 60 year, as Director Yonan will tell you, decision. And generally we are last in the nation in the miles of bus rapid transit. There's been lots of letters to the editor, which I'm grateful for, talking about that importance. And then last but not least, Leanne mentioned we didn't get the climate grant. The best way to, if you live along Lakeshore Drive, to mitigate whatever greenhouse gases you're going to breathe in if you live in Lincoln Park or any of those even up to Evanston, is that mass transit is only a couple of % of the greenhouse gases emitted by transportation. Most of them are automobiles. So this is, aside from the 70,000 people a day, there are 70,000 bus riders a day on this portion of DeSable Lakeshore Drive who would like to get to work or home quicker than they do today. To me, it's a climate issue as well as one that we clearly, and including in the mayor's own transition team recommendations, they were screaming for more bus rapid transit, and that does not follow the recommendations of the mayoral transit committee of his transition team. So lots of work in terms of getting our message across on the importance of that, and hopefully CDOT and IDOT go back to the drawing board. Next, we are grateful to have On item 6A, a presentation on the state of Metra by our friend Jim Derwinski, who's the executive director of Metra. And Jim, it's great to have you here solo today to talk about the great things that are going on at Metra along with the challenges. Good thing is my train was on time and packed today. So thank you
Thank you
for getting me here on time.
Thank you for the support. Thank you for the commentary on the train. That's the way we want all trains. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't always happen. Well, thank you for having me here today, Chairman, members of the board. It's good to walk down the block and give an update mid-year. Again, a lot of things going on at Metra. First slide here, just taking a look at, we celebrated our 40th anniversary this year. You probably may know that. June 8th was our 40th anniversary of the commuter rail division of the RTA. And in that period of time, over 40 years, we did a lot. And I took time to really show our board about all the things that we inherited, that we bought from bankrupt railroads and the inherited infrastructure that we had. But we have so much more to do. And some of that I'll even touch today. So if I can have the next slide. This is really just a small sample of a lot of what's going on here at Metra, but to highlight some of the things that we've talked about in the past through the last budget sequence is the new fares and fare structure. Customer response team, I'll touch on what that is, a revision to our onboard bike policy, and then we launched the access program in partnership with Cook County and RTA earlier this year, and it's been out there 6 months. So I'd like to dive right into and give you basically what's been happening over the 6 months with these topics. Next slide. So we went from a 10-zone system, very complicated, to a 4-zone system. The work that we talked about, and I presented the RTA here last budget sequence. Now it's been out there. It's been out there for 6 months. So what does that look like? What are we hearing, and how is it performing? That's what we'll talk about. If I can have the next slide. So this is the simplified version compared to the old one where you had to get like your glasses out and align your lines up and down. Am I going from this station to that station? We're now down to 4 zones. So either you're going into the central business district, which we call zone 1 in red, and then you find your price point down there. We did lower the monthly price point deliberately to try to attract more people to that fare product in the system. We did eliminate the 10 ride. And we did eliminate the incremental fares. And so with 6 months in, we've got some data to share with you that I shared with the board, our board yesterday. Next slide, please. So this shows basically the same time frame 2 years apart, or a year apart. So Q2, end of Q2 23 to end of Q2 24. You can see the blue bars, it increased from 33 to 42. So monthly sales over that period of time, incorporating the last 6 months, have gained 11% of our sales. The 10 ride in orange, I'll talk about that in a second. And then the day pass that we had, you can see a little bit of reduction of the day pass. The dark green's the 5-pack day pass with a 5% value added. And you can see actually the one-ways increase. And so where did those people that used to use the 10 ride go to? And that's that pie on the right there. So 35%, the majority of that, actually are using multiple ticket types. And that makes sense. One of the things that the 10 ride did give people and claimed to have was flexibility. And so, yeah, they're using sometimes a day pass, sometimes a one-way. The one-way tickets are at 16%, but then almost 50% right now are on the bigger products, the day pass 5-pack, and then as we pointed out, the monthly. And that's where this is through patron ID data. And this is using a January look at it and then a June look at it. So we definitely have the exact same people through the patron ID data that we get from Ventra, and this is exactly what they did with the shifting from the 10 ride since then. Next slide, please. And how has this affected the budget? Well, the orange bars on the left there kind of show where our budgeted marks are, and the blue bars show actually what the average fare product comes in at. So you can kind of see we're floating right around, sometimes a little above, sometimes a little bit below the average fare that we budgeted. And so it's performing, the system is performing as intended. And again, one of our goals was to shift people to the monthly. That performed good as well. On the right, what you can see is what's happening with the ridership in the sales channel. So 77% were on Ventra. We are now up to 83. The report I just submitted to our board yesterday shows we're up to 84. Conductor sales are down from 4 to 3. And the 14 there in the gray, that was where we had customer service agents selling what we call behind the window. That's now shifted and split up between Metra and down to the new green bar, which is our new ticket vending machine. So next slide, please. So these are the new ticket vending machines that we put out there. Currently, there's 130 machines deployed. We have these in two phases. Phase one's about 350, phase two is about 300. In phase one, as we continue to deploy, we're starting to get enormous amounts of data that we didn't have before. The person wearing the nice yellow vest there on the left, that is what we now call a CRT, or a customer response team member. That used to be a ticket agent. So now they're actually out talking with the passengers, showing them how to use the system and bringing us valuable feedback of what they're hearing from the passengers. Also, making sure that the machines, if they have any issues, we have a quicker response to them. Now, customer response team personnel are only at the stations where we formerly had ticket agents. As we continue to deploy the ticket vending machines, we'll continue to assess whether or not we need to add or move personnel from where we're seeing the sales. So again, data that we've never had before. It's incredible when it comes in. So kind of in the next slide, please. So on to the bikes. This year we adapted a new bike policy. We opened up the bike policy. We allowed more bikes on trains. We used to prohibit them during rush hour. COVID kind of really taught us, to go ahead, and wasn't a lot of people on trains. Let the bikes come on the trains. We were missing a first mile, last mile solution all along. So our original bike policy was written in 2005, rewritten and deployed this year, February of this year. And so we like to call this Bike Car 1.5, putting that nice bright green rack. We've got 86 of those out there. Phase one will have 100 when we're all done. And so what's that really done? Let's go to the next slide, take a look at the ridership. We have a 40% increase year over year on bikes on trains already. And that's only through June. So now we're starting to really hit the summer season. It's interesting, yesterday we went out to Woodstock, Illinois for our board meeting and riding a revenue train back, seeing the bikes get on and off the train. It really is probably a missed opportunity when we weren't allowing them during rush hour. Now, new problem, Chairman, as you pointed out, your train was crowded. Sometimes bikes take up a little bit more room. So what we did is to put that green rack in, we took out 3 seats and we try to target putting 3 bikes there. It's not a perfect math equation, but then again, everybody doesn't always sit in the back of the train. A lot of people tend to sit in the front of the train. So there sometimes can be a perceived overcrowding issue on trains. Well, I'd like to remind everyone that there's other cars at the other end of the train. But you can see that the bikes are doing well. And then if you take a look at the complaints, and we put that up there because the blue bars indicate the complaints from cyclists saying, hey, I couldn't get on the train. The conductor wouldn't let me get on the train. And then the other ones, the orange bars, are the ones from the non-cyclists saying, yeah, this guy took up my seat, or why did you do that? And what you can see is from 23 to 24, with 40% more bikes on the train, we're actually trending down. And part of that is maybe because, the world we live in, everybody's willing to give an opinion. We have multiple ways to bring that opinion in. So I believe this is another successful program that we're running. So how did all this affect ridership? If you can go to the next slide. Oh, this one, sorry about that. This is the RTA access program that we talked about. We are up to 9,900 users a month right now, 9,900 ticket sales, 3,400 users. And if you look at the chart in the middle, the vast majority are on Metra Electric at 37% and then 16 or 18 on the Rock Island. What does that tell us? It tells us Fair Transit South Cook was the right thing to do. It absolutely targeted the areas that where people were financially burdened by our fare products. But the interesting thing is that on every line sees use on there, including the BNSF, which probably targets some areas on that line as actually the 3rd highest usage of the access card. 28%, if you look at the pie chart, are actually new riders to the system. So that absolutely is a successful story. And this is, again, using patron ID data along with the RTA card. So if we can go to the next one, look at how that affected system-wide ridership. So here you see all the way back to 2020, 5-year snapshot of ridership. Snapshot really looks like you fell off a cliff and now you're climbing a mountain, and that's what it feels like some days. But there's some real positive stories in there. All those little dips in there, that was, you know, here's Omicron, here's another COVID thing occurring. And then those are all weekly averages. So, you know, when you see a dip, that is the week between Christmas and New Year's where ridership goes down. So I'd like to take you just into 2024 with the next slide. So what we're seeing is continual slow, but consistently steady trend upwards. And what's on the right there are literally the top 10 days. All have occurred within the last 3 months. For the longest time, November, I believe it was 7th last year, was our highest ridership day since pre-COVID, minus a Lollapalooza day. The top number there is Lollapalooza this year. We typically spike Lollapalooza. But the interesting thing is the 2 days before Lollapalooza, 199 and 206 right there, we actually hit new high water marks. And the question is why? Maybe they were all going to Lollapalooza. They actually had to come to work those days. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but the fact is it's still an upward trend and we haven't plateaued yet. We're still seeing increases in ridership. Next slide, please. So this is what the ridership pattern looks like. We talk about this new norm. So I'll take you to the old norm. So then the gray bars there, you can kind of see up in the top, Mondays had a slight depression from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Fridays, this is 2019 data, had an 11% depression from the high of the average of the week. So right to the right of that is what we see currently. And so currently, yeah, it's lower on Mondays, it's lower on Fridays. Matter of fact, right now, we're about 20% lower the average on Monday, 34% lower the average on Friday. But the good news is we're seeing Mondays make a big comeback. As you can see in the top there, it's the biggest gainer over the last 6 months with 21% gain on a Monday. And again, we didn't have all this data like we do now. The 2 years ago is when this data feed started coming in. And so now we can look at things rather than just speculate and look at conductor counts. So this is, again, I think a very positive trend. We don't control when employees are told to come into the office or employers are making people come in the office, but we do know this from patron ID data, there is no set pattern. Again, why would you spike on it this Tuesday and then that Thursday? It doesn't really have a pattern yet. All we know is that there's a trend in that direction. So on ridership, I like to take down the path of talking about what ridership could look like on the system. Next slide, please. If in fact we did something I've talked about before, which is provide O'Hare Express service. So this Monday, we actually launched what I'll call a pilot for the DNC, where we're running hourly service to O'Hare. This took a lot of legwork in partnership with the 2 freight railroads that control the movement on those trains. So it started. It started on Monday. We start expecting today is when delegates and others will start coming into town. We're going to monitor this. We're surveying the heck out of it to find out what people like. Are people using it from the city just to now say, hey, it's a better opportunity to go to O'Hare? Or are they using it from O'Hare to come in? And we're going to run this through the 30th. So with that, we're going to hopefully get some good data and good feedback. Again, this is only a pilot. And people are going to ask, well, if you can run it now, why can't you run it forever? The freights really did step up. They really recognize that this is a great opportunity for Chicago. It's a great opportunity for all of us to put Chicago's best foot forward. And they have made some adjustments to their schedules and worked with us. Needed infrastructure is going to have to be put in place. And that's what's highlighted there. Realistically, we have got to work on A2. We move 350 trains across A2 every day. That needs to be turned into a flyover. A5, the next junction up there, needs to be turned into a flyover. The next one up there is actually Grand Avenue. We actually are building a grade separation there, working with Elmhurst. And then B12, that probably needs to be turned into a flyover and eventually getting to a transfer station. Currently today, if you're just looking at regular NCS service, we run 7 trains out, 7 trains in. That's it. So if you want to go to O'Hare, you better have that time perfectly. And if you just landed and had to go get your luggage and you got to do a timing thing, that's probably not the best opportunity. So if we can build this system and build the infrastructure necessary, we can absolutely run this on 20 or 30-minute intervals, and we can make that trip down to under 30 minutes. And we're going to talk about that. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is a conceptual look at a vehicle in the O'Hare transfer station. So we've taken out some of our elected officials that support us in the region. And we've talked to them about what this would look like. And so there's a general interest. I think Chicago is one of the few major cities in the world that doesn't have a commuter type service there. Yes, we have CTA service and it's really good, but it really takes a little bit longer than what we can provide. We have that direct access, be able to get in more of on an express route. Again, the CTAs are good, but it doesn't have the infrastructure to run that type of express service that probably would be competing with other major cities in the world. Significant funding is required. This is, we are in the conceptual phase. We are doing some studies on this. We have funded nothing when it comes down to the actual infrastructure improvements. So talking about some infrastructure improvements, I'd like to go to the next slide. The picture on the left there is a bridge over Milwaukee Avenue on the North Line on the Milwaukee North, built in 1899. We have a lot of bridges from 1899. I'll talk about that in a second. It was rehabbed in 1940. That's back when the Milwaukee Road actually took care of their infrastructure. When Metra and the RTA helped us buy the Milwaukee Road assets back in 1983, yeah, that bridge hadn't been touched in 40 some years. And here we are 40 some years later, and that bridge needs to be replaced. So this was a big project. We had to go for several applications to try to get it. What the picture on the right showing you in the yellow is where the bridge actually sits and what we had to do to go around it. We actually had to build this thing called a shoe fly. A shoe fly is a complete another railroad bridge that runs around the bridge so that you can actually replace the bridge. And that includes freight traffic over it. So this is not just set up some timber structure. This is literally some real steel. So if we can go to the next slide and kind of see what it looks like. Metra train here going over the shoe fly, and then the big girder beams that are going in. There you're getting closer to the completion on the right. Next slide, please. And here's just an aerial of the overhead. There's that new bridge over Milwaukee Avenue. What you may or may not notice from the beginning to the end is how the bike lanes have opened up. We went from having those beams that hold up the bridge next to the sidewalks to now there's just one center beam in the road. It's a much more user-friendly for the bike and enthusiasts out there. And we actually worked with the bike community on that in the design. What's just south of that or to the right of that is the Grayland Station. It will be open in about another year. There's massive amounts of infrastructure have to be put in place to make it ADA compliant using ramps at this particular location. But one of the biggest challenges Metra has is the fact that a vast majority of our railroads, specifically in the city of Chicago, is elevated. And when you have an elevated railroad, you have very little different footprints that you can actually do when you're designing stations. But this one here is going to be a great project when it's finally done. Got a little bit more to go. If I go to the next slide. May 20th, we opened up Peterson Ridge Station. This station here is the first one to get added to the North Line. I think there's another slide behind this. If you can, one more. Nope. Excuse me. So that's the finished product of Peterson Ridge. That's fine. When we opened it, it was like kind of in a desert area. Turns out there used to be 3 stations when the Chicago Northwestern opened it in that community. The one burned down, 2 were closed by the railroad that had to run on profit margins. This is the first one to be put back in, and already since May 20th to now, we're already up to 400 passengers a day at that station. And if you look at our system, that's a pretty solid already use of a station. So good to see Peterson Ridge there, and more like that to come. Next slide, please. So next to Peterson Ridge there was a nice brand new bridge. We have a lot of bridges. We operate over 926 bridges every single day. Metra owns 446 of those, and in red there on the top, that's 210. We have got to start working on it. I mentioned the 1899 bridge, Milwaukee Avenue, now is in the center blue section. It's a bridge that doesn't need to be worked on. But we've got so many bridges that we need to work on from these legacy components and the fact that we run on these elevated structures on a normal basis. So I'd like to take you through the next slide, and this one's you're gonna have to pop it one at a time, please. So there's 10 bridges on the right. If we did 10 bridges a year for the next 9 years, you do 90 bridges. And we take care of all the bridges that are now older than 1900. Hit it again, please. And if we continued to work on this for the next 20 years, we'd finally finish all the bridges that are older than 1910. Now, mind you, that's 30 years from now. We'd finally finish the bridges that were built by 1910. If you hit the slide one more time. And if we finally worked on this for almost the next 50 years. We'd finally get rid of all the bridges and rehab and replace all the bridges that are currently 100 years old, as I sit here today. So they'd only be 146 years old when we replace them. This is not a solution. So I presented this to the board in 2018. You might recall, some of you were here, I presented this slide to the board. So now, looking at this, rather than just handing you a problem, I'm now going to give you the solution and the plan. So if you can go to the next slide. We've dug into this really deep, bringing on teams of people to really assess each bridge. And we've built a comprehensive database behind what these bridges need. And rather than just look at age, we build these things in called sufficiency ratings. We won't get into all that today. But our current approach for the last 9 decades, 90 years, has been 3 bridges a year on average. You can see this math equation is never going to work. And by the way, all I'm talking about are the 210 bridges that Metra owns. We still have financial responsibility for all the other bridges that we share with freight. It's a shared responsibility, but they're pretty old as well. So our proposed plan is 20 years, 5 bridges a year rehabbing, which gives you another about 30 years on that bridge, and 5 bridges a year replacement. Ballpark, $140 million a year. So over 20 years, that's about $2.9 billion. If we really wanted to attack this and put our money where it needs to go, and this is only bridges, we'd actually enhance that to 12 bridges a year, with 5 more being rehabilitated, and we'd actually attack 240 bridges over the next 20 years. Now, none of these numbers are built in with the escalators of inflation. So in other words, we need a dedicated funding source for this. I cannot tap into, on a normal basis, our state of good repair money just to work on these bridges. This is a bigger problem. So we've talked and talked and talked about how do we attack this, and we will be starting to have conversations about longer-term financial solutions that potentially could address this problem that we in the past haven't used to address this problem, because I cannot stop all the other state of good repair needs that we have. So if we can go to the next slide. This one's kind of, UP North Line highlighted there in green. I'm just going to go around the world for a second for you. What would it look like? In these Senate transportation hearings, we talk about the system we want. And I've often stated at these hearings that the people that weren't at the table building the system we want, the governance we want, or how to pay for it, we're the actual operators. Metra, CTA, and PACE, we're not at those tables. No one, they consulted us. We met with the Institute, but at the end of the day, they didn't say, what do you guys think? So what is a good system? A system that's built on regional rail, which we've been talking about, is a system where you've got the hourly service bare minimum, more increased service throughout the peak periods, longer into the night, earlier into the morning. Talked about it at the last transportation hearing on Friday. This is what a good operating commuter system should look like. Not just those central business district trips, and of course, tying the schedules together. It doesn't make sense. You come on your BNSF train, you hit Union Station, and you want to go to O'Hare. You want to use Metra, go to O'Hare, but the O'Hare train left 5 minutes before you got in. So you have to build the schedules with the current infrastructure that we have, because we're not going to be knocking buildings down to connect Ogilvy to Union or connect somehow LaSalle to Ogilvy. That's not going to happen. In a realistic world, that's not going to happen. We're not going to tunnel under Chicago. So we've got to do this through scheduling, and we've got to do this through other infrastructure, specifically possibly circulators downtown. So that's what it could look like if we had a system. Now I'm going to just kind of go down really quick. We triple track up to Glencoe on the North Line, do some yard improvements, get 25% more trains out there. It costs about $1.5 billion in capital and about $20 million more in operating. I'm not going to ask you to memorize this, but I'm just going to say on the Milwaukee line, another main track, crossovers, many yard improvements. The North Central service, that one's only got, like I said, 7 up and 7 down today. A lot more sidings, yard expansions, both at the outer point and the inner point. UP Northwest, major yard improvements. We're at capacity in all of our yards. Milwaukee District West, we need all of the things we need for O'Hare, plus some more going out past Bensonville. UP West, yard expansions. UP West is about to finish its triple track all the way out to Elburn. That's really going to help capacity, but that's also their #1 freight line in. So we need like a proviso flyover so that they can get in and out of the yard and the passenger trains can keep going without impediment. BNSF, a lot of crossovers, triple track all the way out to Aurora. It's built correctly, but it needs a lot more flexibility and it needs more expansion in the yards. Out at the Hill Yard, we're stuffed. Southwest Service, this is all part of CREATE. I'll talk about that in a second, but we really need an additional main track all the way out. Rock Island, that's something we're working on right now. We call it RID3. That's actually something we're putting in for grant applications to get the design finished so we can actually triple track from LaSalle all the way out to Gresham. This will increase our capacity and be able to handle Southwest Service trains coming over there and Amtrak trains. Metra Electric, that's already got incredible infrastructure, but we've often talked about what would it look like if it was more like a rapid transit type system. And because it's got no grade crossings, no freight crossings, 20-minute all-day service, all of this said and done. What's this cost? Let's go to the next slide. So this is our strategic report card, is our vision. And if you go down just into the center, the big bullet is 15 to 20 billion to build it. And again, I know I'm bringing you guys a lot of money. And somewhere in that 15 to 20 billion, I'll change out a bunch of those bridges. So you're getting double bang for your buck. But 300 to 500 million to operate. We've got to make decisions here in the state of Illinois, in this country. If we're going to prioritize public transportation at the highest level, then it's got to be funded at the correct level. And we've all too often not funded things correctly. And I think what I love about Metra's story is we did come from bankrupt properties where it didn't make it in the private market. We were inherited all this stuff. And I've said it before, I think we've done too good. We've done too much with too little, and we just been compromising. That's why we're still running 1953 cars. That's why a 1977 locomotive probably brought the chairman in today. And the public deserves better than that. The Metro riders deserve better than that. And the region deserves better than that. So we go one more topic, and that is the CREATE program. Next slide, please. The CREATE program has been around for 20 years. It was designed after a massive snowstorm in 1999 to detangle the rail network. The vast majority of the rail network comes through Chicago. We have 1,400 trains that operate inside this hub every single day. When it shut down with the massive snowstorm in 99, we shut the country down because nothing could move states out. And with all the rules that come around operating a railroad, this collapsed us for months. So they come up and they said, you have to come up with solutions. The CREATE program was these solutions that had 70 different projects. And in those 70 different projects, we've been working on them, trying to fix some of the infrastructure that existed, detangle the network, as like I say, and it's got improvements from everything from towers to switching to grade separations of rail to rail, grade separations of road to rail, all of this to detangle this network. Can we go to the next slide? One of the critical areas that we're working on right now is called a 75th Street SIP, or Corridor Improvement Project. It's a suite of 4 different major projects. Currently underway is P3 and GS19, grade separation 19, which will actually grade separate the CSX from 71st Street. P3 is a big flyover there where CSX is going to fly over what we call that whole junction in there. This is the big, you get to see it today. It's the biggest bottleneck in the entire country. Underneath there are 4 railroads operating right now at grade. EW2 and P2 are the other 2 major components that are being designed currently right now, and they're not funded. And then eventually RID3, which I talked about, is needed so that it can absorb all the trains that would eventually come off the Southwest Service onto the Rock Island when this is all said and done. So if you go to the next slide, there's some actual again, some salient things that would happen. We can increase the freight trains. We eliminate 18,000 plus passenger hour train delay annually on that line alone. Next slide, please. And this is actually what we're doing out there. So that's the junction. That's the train in blue, CSX train there in the upper left corner. That one's now going to fly over all those other trains. So those other trains no longer they still have to crisscross each other at another point, which is what EW2 fixes. So you can see the congestion point. Now, just like any old intersection, when you pull up and you got a red light and somebody crosses in front of you, imagine if that somebody is a 3-mile long freight train moving at 10 miles an hour. So that's what it looks like. It's in progress. It's the work should be done in about a year. This is one of the largest and most expensive projects on the entire CREATE program, but this is the way we're going to fix this network. So it's not just bridges, it's not just cars and locomotives, it's not just O'Hare Express, and it's not just the CREATE program. It's everything. It's the system we want. Fix the state of good repair needs that we all inherited, untangle this network, and add this the deliberate infrastructure that's needed so that we can actually provide regional rail for the people of Chicago and that visit Chicago. And last slide, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jim. Director Colson.
Yeah, hi, Jim. Metra does a remarkable job day in and day out, moving people pretty safely and pretty much on time. As you well know, and you and I have talked about this, the problem in my area is when you eliminated the 10 ride and you eliminated the single ticket good for 14 days, with people without smartphones, the only way to ride Metra is to buy a ticket on the day of travel. That's the situation now. And if you're at a place without a ticket agent or a machine, the only way to travel on Metra is to pay cash for a fare. You know, my people feel that adds maybe 5 to 10 minutes on their daily commute. And it's a lot less convenient, certainly, which I think are points worthy of consideration. You said in your publications, it says 20% of your customers don't use smartphones. Did you upgrade that?
It's up to 84 now. In the last 6 months, it went from 77 to 84% now use Metra app.
Okay, so maybe you're losing the you're losing the non-smartphone people. That's one other way to look at it, maybe.
It's possible. I mean, ridership is up, and one of the hardest things to look at is the people that don't have a smartphone, right? That's where the real data point comes in from the 84%.
Right.
The onboard ticket sales are at 3%, so we do get some data points from there. And now with the TVMs, we're starting to get some new data points that never existed before.
And I assume that you've seen an uptick in cash fares. Do you have any numbers on? I mean, I had a conductor tell me he normally did 2 cash fares in the old days per shift, and now he's doing 30. Is that a fair statistic, or do you have any
they're
numbers
down.
on that?
Cash fares onboard sales are down. They're down from 4% in January. They're down to 3% on the system. So what we're seeing is like, there's probably more cash fares on the Metra Electric that we hear about than any other line. And again, this really goes into why Fair Transit South Cook was such an important pilot program to help us learn a lot. But actually on the system, cash fares are down by 1%.
And what can be done to try to lure the people who don't use smartphones? I'm talking about visitors, the occasional rider, the poor, the unbanked, some people with disabilities, many seniors. And there are a lot of customers just averse to using the smartphones. I mean, I don't think you can neglect that part of the market because you're a public utility. What can you do to try to bring those people back?
So what we do is we continue to have these updates. So this is the first 6 months of data. We bring in our conductors, we talk to them, we then start doing focus groups, and we start working with also the peer agencies. So some of the solutions here are ticket vending machines at every single station. Not sure if we're going to go there. We're going to be data driven in that decision. Another one is giving the conductors the ability to do credit cards or Apple Pay or what all the other different pays. But then again, you'd have to have a cell phone to do that. But we are looking at potentially a different sales channel for the conductors. It's always been a connectivity and a security issue for us, not security of the money, but more security of the data. But we are having those conversations, and that may be something we propose in the future.
And how difficult would it be to bring back the 10 ride? I mean, I don't see the difficulty.
Well, the problem with the 10 ride right now is the fact that it's a fare product that we can't monitor, right? The 10 ride historically, and the electronic data supports this, is that people were turning it anywhere from an 11 to a 15 ride. And that, not everyone, there are a lot of great people out there that use 10 rides for 10 rides, but they were moving it in a direction where it really was what we call leakage.
Well, that's the conductor's responsibility, though, right? To look at it and make sure it's valid and then punch it.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would urge you to consider bringing back the 10 ride. Thank you.
Director Yonan.
Director Dewinski, again, just a great presentation. I think, again, over the years that we've seen your leadership and your ability to surround yourself with some incredible talent to be able to, not only do this presentation, but talk about some projects that you've seen some success in, and the fact that you've, partnered with a number of other agencies really says, again, a lot about just your leadership and this not just being about, one, unit of transit. One thing I wanted to kind of highlight was, on the Cook County's Fair Transit Program. I know you were a big part of some of the discussions when it came to these new users that were going to have this opportunity. There was a lot of sacrifice when we looked at how some folks had to use 2-3 modes of transit, whether it was Pace Bus onto then CTA train, then back onto a CTA bus. I think there's a big story to be told about how those new riders aren't just a statistic of, of convenience or something that, has just kind of opened up as being, a cheaper fare. But you've done a lot to really be able to kind of make their lives improve tremendously. And I think that, story needs to get out there a little bit more. Number one. Question for you is on the 4-zone system. Again, another story that sometimes gets lost is you really revised that schedule in a way that played into the way those zones were laid out. How is that revised schedule going, and do you see any other tweaks? You normally do tweaks of it, but overall, how is that schedule with the zones kind of coming along for you?
So on the schedule, there's always what I'll say, a winner and a loser, a supporter, and someone who's not so happy with the changes made. We did it very deliberately with the infrastructure that was in place where we could move express trains where the infrastructure allowed around. So example, we might have moved where an express train was pre to a new place. The pre, they're not as happy with us. The new people that have the express train, they're very happy about that. So it's working very well. What we're doing is constantly analyzing the data. Again, with the variance of almost 34% just on one day of the week compared to the mid part of the week, it sometimes gets very hard and difficult to sit there and say this train's ready to be split into 2 different trains. And that's typically what we've been doing as we adapt and modify and tweak the schedule. It has to do with the timing of the trains passing each other, has to do with the infrastructure that's in place. Sometimes it actually has to do with the construction that's going on. And then eventually, if we can, we split the train into 2. And then we turn that into like, maybe this one does the first, 5 stops, and then that one does the next 5 stops, and kind of almost start creating mini expresses. The other challenge in all this, of course, is the freight partners on the lines that we don't control and own and dispatch.
Yeah, and then lastly, O'Hare Express has always been a great story. It's great that you're piloting that, this convention season, and I think, it just continues to need to, get that story out there. When you look at, earlier talking about Lakeshore Drive and how that, City of Chicago, $7 billion project, the red line extension, which is in that $3 to $5 billion. The state's going to eventually have to redo the Eisenhower from that 7 to 10 billion. So I know you didn't share the cost of this, but I think this is a project of that type of caliber and importance. And I just really encourage you to continue to tell the story on that one, because we truly do need and believe that I think Metra, and I know that Metra is the solution for the O'Hare Express. So please continue to do that. And thank you for, again, your long-term vision to also know you've got to take care of your existing infrastructure, and excited about some of that, bridge projects that are coming up as well. So thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you for your comments. And again, I'm the spokesman. I have a great team, as you point out. I have great people that really are running and impressing me every day of the week. And to your point, on just real quick on the O'Hare piece, we've got to find win-wins. We have to find win-wins. The interstate commerce and what the freight railroads do for us. Sometimes people don't understand that what we buy in the store is only because the freight railroad moved it here in one way, shape, or form. The biggest inland port in the entire country is in Joliet, Illinois, and that's coming from both coasts. We've got to have win-wins. We've got to build a proper infrastructure so that the passengers can do what the passengers need to do, including Amtrak and other interstate operators down the road, and then the freights can get through. So, I mean, it's time to detangle this network.
Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jim, a great job. I'd like to echo the comments of some of my other colleagues in terms of Metra's responsiveness and your comment about you got a great team. I see Janice is here as well as Romaine. I don't know if Romaine's here or not, but you've really kind of been very cooperative and we really appreciate that. You referenced before, you made comments at prior board meetings and unfortunately, I've been around long enough to have heard some of them. So I had a couple of questions to follow up from those prior board meetings just to see where things stand. The first question is on the infrastructure bill that the president passed. Did Metra benefit from any of that for some of the roads, bridges rather, that you have to repair or replace? Was any of those funds earmarked that Metra could have access to?
So the term earmark would be absolutely not. Earmarks don't exist. But through the state of good repair formula money, we got an enhancement. Everyone got an enhancement through the bill. And with that enhanced money, we were able to actually start advancing some design. So in the plan that I showed you, that you're gonna all help me fund, we actually are designing and doing PE NEPA on 5 and 5 already. We've got 2 years of what I call the preliminary legwork that you have to do. So when you put in a grant application, you're not just saying, here's my picture, I got a great idea. You've already done all the FTA required work. So we're funding that today, this year and next year. Then the question comes in construction season. When you finally get into that third year, if I don't get that construction money, I can't do it. So yes, some went to the bridges that were already in our program. Some of it went to design work so that we can actually accelerate this program, but I need that backside funding to actually do the big lift.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second of three questions was, in the past, because of some of the issues with employers, their needs, whether or not they were going to participate in either providing subsidies for employees to take public transportation, there were going to be talks that Metra was going to engage in with major employers in the city because a lot of the destinations are really downtown oriented. Wondered if there's any updates in terms of what transpired on those conversations and whether anything came from those.
So yes, conversations did occur with employers, but the other place we've been working with is actually venues. So we just partnered with Chicago Sky. We've had a historic partnership with I know we've had well, it's on, but it's not working. We've had a historic partnership with Ravinia. That's worked well. And we've been trying to work with other entities downtown because we're seeing the discretionary market really be one of our bigger lifts. But as far as the employers go, it's still a tug of war between the employer and the employee. It's a tug of war out there. So you can sell all of the how it saves $12,500 from operating your car to anything. It's still about the employer and the employee tug of war that still exists out there.
Okay. My final question is relative to the Universal Fare Card program. I know Metra probably has the biggest challenge in terms of the disparity between the cost for transportation one versus the other. It's been a particular area of interest on the South Cook County program that John alluded to before for President Preckwinkle. Any updates in terms of your thoughts on I guess, implementation process for the Universal Fare Program as it relates to Metra?
So to be clear, the Universal Fare Program that we've all signed all of the MOUs and agreements with, that's a day pass. And so it'll be a pilot and I'm very excited. Again, you can obviously tell I'm a very data-driven person. So I'm very excited to see how that fare product will be used. So the implementation, it's going to really come down to the vendor that supplies the back-end channels for this, and it will be electronic. So that Director Colson, you might not like that one either, but the data that comes in, I think, is going to tell a story, and that'll help us tell the story of what's the next step.
Thank you.
And I'll add, I think you recall, there's already a monthly regional pass. And this was the next step to move to the one-day pass. And it was at the last board meeting where we passed our IGA with the 3 service boards. We all did them around the same month. And as Jim said, it's now in sort of the hands of the vendor who does all the back office and the system management to actually help us deliver that.
In the monthly pass today, as it sits, it's the people that take advantage of what's called the Regional Connect Pass. In other words, they pay the extra $30. They get to utilize PACE and CTA for an entire month. Seems like a pretty good deal. That's 6%. 6% of our monthly users take advantage of that.
Great. Before I forget, Madam Secretary, will you add Director Melvin to the role and add Director Gorman if she joins us by the internet? Director Carey.
I'd also like to put, we can get to him, in a minute, but Director Sager also has his hand up. Let me,
Thank you. Director Carey.
Again, like my fellow board members, really appreciate you taking the time to come and give us so much information on the state of affairs right now. A couple of quick questions. One, I'm not very familiar with the CREATE program. You said it's public-private, so that's not all being funded by Metra, is it?
Oh, no, this is
Along with the freight?
yeah, this is a huge investment from the freight community.
Okay.
They have their own website. I mean, it's been in existence 20 years. It literally takes each and every one of the 70 projects, breaks down the timeline, the funding, and the where we're at in the three phases, be it preliminary design, full design, or construction.
So, but Metra contributes somewhat, or?
So it's a unique partnership. Metra actually hosts to create partners on a monthly basis at Metra headquarters to have these conversations. So it goes on what's called like the shared responsibility. So in other words, if Union Pacific, for an example, saw absolutely no benefit to the P1 flyover, which we call the Inglewood flyover, they wouldn't have any financial partnership in it. So at that particular one, it was Amtrak, Metra, and Norfolk Southern.
Okay. In looking at sort of the holy grail here, which is the regional rail, is there, I'm going back in time pre-pandemic when we were talking a lot about the NCS line, and there was a lot of discussion about what to do with it going forward because ridership wasn't meeting the levels anticipated. And we talked about the chicken and the egg because there's, I live out, where I live in Lake County, and I've used it a couple times to go here, but it's not reliable because if you come back in the evening, if you come back on a weekend, forget it, it's not there. So how do you do the analysis to figure out, well, yes, if we added evening service to the NCS, if we added weekend service, do you ever do that on a trial basis and see if, the ridership would be there?
Well, actually, that's what this DNC pilot is. This is our first real attempt at trying to add service, and specifically with the DNC service, it's just to and from O'Hare,
Okay.
from Union Station O'Hare, so it's not going all the way to Antioch. It supplements the Antioch trains. So there's really, it's hourly service plus the 7 out and the 7 in. And to your point, but I think pre-pandemic, we were at 20, so we were 10 out, 10 in. And we had gaps in there sometimes of 2.5, 3 hours. It's not conducive for somebody to just get off an airplane and go, okay, I want to take the train to the city. Infrastructure, without the dedicated infrastructure, again, to protect interstate commerce and what the freights are doing out there. And this has to be a partnership, both of the freight seeing the benefit of it and the public seeing the benefit in Metra. We're not going to get this done. Without the infrastructure, we can't just force a schedule on them as the owners and dispatchers. And at the end of the day, we go there today, like you said, we can go there probably 4 times an hour if the infrastructure was correct.
Okay. That's all I had, but I did want to thank you as we collectively respond to the MMA bill and look at ways that we can do things better and smarter together across all the agencies, with RTA providing some leadership. I appreciate your cooperation as we work on that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Director Carey. Any other questions or comments from?
Director Saga has his hand up.
Yes, Director Sager.
Thank you, Chairman. Jim, I just want to say first, as I have said before, I am incredibly impressed and most grateful for the exceptional leadership that you have provided along with your professional, very productive team. I think you've done a remarkable job, especially in light of the inherited challenges. And as you so appropriately stated, I think you've done too good for too little. And I think that's a really positive thing, but it's a real challenging thing. So congratulations and thank you very much for that. I also commend you all for, as has been just recently discussed, the DNC O'Hare pilot project. I think that's an exceptional effort. I think it's a highly, highly important project, and it should give us some exceptional data as we look ahead to increasing the opportunities for ridership to and from O'Hare as a major transportation portion of our larger community. So I commend you all for that. I think it's a great thing to be doing. Also, you've outlined a number of completed and yet needed infrastructure projects, particularly in being very aggressive with the bridge rebuild. And I commend you on that. That's an absolute necessity, I think, that we're all aware of. And so thank you for your efforts in that. I do have just a couple of questions. And the first is, and this is an unfair question, so in fact, both of my questions are unfair, but I'm going to pose them anyway. The first is that you indicated that there's a significant need of 15 to $20 billion in terms of the improvements across the system. That's a huge number. It's hard for most of us to imagine how it's going to be possible to fund that dollars amount. And so I'm wondering, just your personal perspective as a leader of Metra right now, what is your personal perspective on the future of funding for infrastructure improvements in transit in Illinois right now?
I think to answer that question, it is a big number. And what I suggest there is that you literally have regional rail then. You've literally built the system that London has, that Paris has. It is an undertaking that will last hundreds of years, as Paris has. How do you address this? You take it into pieces and parts. You find the infrastructure improvements that you can get more throughput, more service. Service levels are the first and foremost thing that we have to work on, frequency of service. To do that, sometimes you might build it and they will come, as they say. That's when we're going to have to get into yard improvements. Some of our yards are already at maximum capacity. We have a lot of things at capacity over the last 40 years that really have made us do a little bit more with less. So I think it's taking it in different chunks. I don't ever anticipate this being a one-time ask that fixes everything all at once. I don't even think there's enough contractors out there to tackle something like that, because some of these things are really massive projects. And when I talk about like an A2 grade separation and detangling where that 350 trains cross that pinch point built in 1937 every single day on air operated switches that we have to light on fire in winter, that's a big dollar amount. But that would be one project that's going to take several years. So I guess to answer your question, I hope what I've done is plant the seed, and I hope all the future executive directors of Metra and Metra's future existence go ahead and grow all these flowers.
I appreciate your and admire your data-driven approach, and I think you're absolutely correct, and I believe that piece by piece, part by part, step by step, if you will, that's going to move us into the future. So thank you for that dedicated approach. You've also provided me the exceptional segue, for which I'm very grateful, with regards to yard improvements. So we've been talking a lot about the macro vision. I want to go to micro project right now. And you indicated that there are major UP Northwestern yard improvements that are required. Bluntly, what do you believe the status of the Woodstock yard might be?
So yesterday, we actually had our board meeting in Woodstock, Illinois. The mayor was gracious enough to welcome us to Woodstock. He clearly talked about his support for the Woodstock Yard project. We are in the conceptual stages of that, and we are going to have to try to find some dedicated funding for that. It is something that will help expand capacity on the Northwest line. Absolutely. There's obviously going to be land acquisition, and then it'll be some shifting around of how that service pattern goes. But that line has got so much growth potential if we can increase the service levels up there. We are triple track all the way out to Barrington. The other thing we have out to Barrington is almost no freight traffic. So you've got basically the same scenario that you almost have on the Metra Electric minus a few crossings, where you can actually run some pretty incredible service levels of commuter. But again, we have to expand the yards.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that response, and glad you had a good day in Woodstock. I wish I could have been there myself, but state fair responsibilities precluded that. But I do appreciate your update. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Any other questions, Director Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question was prompted by Dr. Sager's comments. This weekend was the Air and Water Show. I was over in Northwest Indiana, kind of at the Gary Airport, watching the planes land and take off. But it made me think, relative to some of the things that Metra's trying to do, we're not necessarily independent. There's an interdependency between, say, for example, Northwest Indiana, southern Wisconsin. So my question is, looking at a lot of the things that you're looking at, how much do you have to have the cooperation of some of our adjacent partners in order to accomplish the goal? Or is that a factor at all in what you're trying to accomplish as it relates to Metra?
Yeah, so without getting too deep into the weeds, I speak with Indiana and Wisconsin on a regular basis. Milwaukee was just down talking with us about some of their wants, needs, and desires. Comes always back to where's the money. We've obviously talked to some of our surrounding counties, and Indiana, not only are they just right next to us, but they are actually a true partner. We have a PSA with Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District, or called South Shore, because they operate on Metra Electric all the way up to, so I mean, literally 5 times a week conversation with Indiana. And we've been talking a lot about this idea of, a network. How does this work as a network? Matter of fact, Indiana is actually stepped up to the plate and says, we'd like to use our ability as a, what's called state railroad, interstate railroad. They have access to different potential grant programs that Metra just quite honestly doesn't. So we've been talking about partnerships there to improve infrastructure on Metra Electric so that they can have better train service. And of course, we would benefit as well with better train service. And I'm talking about bidirectional signaling on the Metra Electric on the north end.
Great, thank you. I applaud your innovation. A railroad is very difficult to move, and you've been nimble as I've ever seen out of my 30+ years experience with Metra. So, when folks say, what are you doing post-pandemic and other things, Metra's innovation is very, very, very impressive. You still have any wooden bridges?
We do.
I mean, that's
2. One will be gone by the end of this year.
It's, when you're out there stressing the need for money, wooden bridges, when I tell individuals, I told somebody this yesterday, they just shake their head that there are still wooden bridges around. Mechanical breakdowns. So when I look and get a notice on my phone that there's a mechanical breakdown, is that usually older locomotives, or what can a mechanical breakdown be?
So coming from a mechanical department, it may sound a little bit defensive, but the problem with that term is that when the train don't move right then and there, unless it's a known signal issue, it's going to be a mechanical breakdown. That could include the fact that the brakes are not releasing because of PTC, which eventually gets called a PTC breakdown. So yeah, initially, unfortunately, again, sounding a little defensive here, everything's called a mechanical breakdown until you finally dust it all off and shake it out later, and they have their debrief meeting the next day and they finally figure it out. Sometimes it's a human error, sometimes it is mechanical. So to answer your question, it's not the old locomotives. It's not always the old locomotives. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest challenges I think we have in industry is operating old locomotives with retrofitted newer technologies. So before, if something went bad, you just shove this in, put that in there and made it go. Now, all these little sensors all over the place, one little sensor, one little wire in a sensor, one failed sensor tells the computer, shut this thing down, and then it's mechanical failure. So we've got people at work, to try to get that train moving, but yeah, everything starts as a mechanical failure unless it's known signal or switch or grade crossing.
I always like to see the green good service, when I look at my BNSF route or listen to Kai Martin on Channel 5. I did ride my Eisenhower car in this morning, literally. John, I ride in sometimes on a car that was delivered when Dwight Eisenhower was president. So it's remarkable that we still have those in service. It's a testimony to union labor that keeps those cars in great shape. You should be proud of me. I finished a book, and it took me a long time, called Mass Motorization and Mass Transit, written by David Jones. That is a great primer on the history of the bankrupt railroads and Metra here, but just also public transit, including the CTA. And, we used to have Westtown Bus, and we've had, a number of private companies. But it goes through, the advantages of not only Metra, but mass transit. 30+ more lanes of highway it would take if we didn't have Metra. We have nowhere to put those lanes, nor could we afford them as the state of Illinois. Climate change and fewer greenhouse gas emissions, lower auto rates by having Metra is pointed out in that book that mass transit lowers everybody's automobile insurance rates, whether they believe it or not. And whether they believe it or not, think of the congestion we would have on the Kennedy if we didn't have you or the blue line running up and down it. I do, on O'Hare, just anecdotal, but when I first became the chairman, I had a client who came in from London, and I was proud of our city. It's a world-class city, blah, blah, blah. And with his great British accent, he goes, "You'll never be in my mind a world-class city until you have quicker and better service in from O'Hare. You can't have a world-class city designation, unless you're moving people, and the L's great. But it's a little slow. And if you have luggage, it's also an issue, because he said, I said, "How'd you get in?" He said, "Uber, because I have luggage. I can't take the L." When I asked him about the L, like I read Dorval Carter choked up yesterday talking about the Red Line extension, and that's his legacy project. I think the O'Hare situation is probably your legacy, and I stay on it. It's so needed by the city of Chicago, and O'Hare is our economic engine. And last but not least, for those of you who don't know, Jim's a naval veteran. And when I first talked to Jim and congratulated him on taking over for Don Orsino at Metra, I said, "I'm impressed you come out of the mechanical side of Metra's operation, which is great." And he goes, "Yeah, it's easy to take care of Metra, and it's not easy to take care of Metra after you've been on a submarine." And I think of you all the time. I just saw we deployed submarines to the Persian Gulf. So when I see the submarines with our naval personnel on it, I think of you. But thank you. You've always been accessible to us, which we and the staff here at the RTA deeply appreciate. And keep up your great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Director Mellon.
Great presentation, great job.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jim, thank you very much.
And in your packets is the bridge proposal. Go ahead and talk to your friends.
Send in $5.
Let me know what else we can do. I can
Right.
move some numbers up and down. I'd rather move them up, get more done.
And I want to point out Michael Gillis, I think is Mike, you're back there. Mike, when I can't get a hold of Jim Derwinski or Janice, which is hardly ever, because Janice and Jim are great at returning, but Michael gets the brunt of a lot of my calls and said, "Michael, will you talk to Janice? Will you talk to Jim?" But Mike's a veteran of the Chicago Sun-Times and a great spokesman and jack of all trades at Metra. Michael, thank you very much as always. All right, let's move on to item 6B is an update on the activities of the RTA's Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board. And Jackie Forbes, thank you for being back there waiting patiently and for all you do.
Right, thank you. And I'm proud to say I did take Metra on the UP West line this morning to get here, so I can join in on the conversation. All right, good morning, Chairman Dillard and members of the Board of Directors. Thank you for your time this morning. My name is Jackie Forbes and I am the chairperson of the RTA CAB. I'm here to provide an update of the activities of the CAB. At our last RTA CAB meeting on July 22nd, RTA staff provided two presentations. The first was an educational presentation on how the transit system is funded in this region and the annual regional budget development process. The second was a briefing on the recently released Building a More Equitable Fare Structure report that was required by 2023 omnibus legislation. RTA CAB members expressed interest in providing input into the 2025 budget development and were provided information on how to provide their feedback later in the budget development process. In addition, RTA CAB members expressed support for the recommendation offered in the Building an Equitable Fare Structure report to create a system-wide reduced fare program for regional residents experiencing lower incomes and enrolled in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. We understand that this is possible only if existing reduced fare, ride-free, and ADA paratransit programs are fully funded in this region, and additional funding is provided for this expansion. In addition to those two presentations, staff facilitated a brainstorming session to generate a list of organizations, groups, or businesses that RTA CAB members felt would be beneficial to include in RTA's outreach efforts going forward. The goal of this activity was to identify new organizations to support transit in this region beyond the current list of organizations and individuals who are already supportive and actively engaged. RTA CAB members generated a list of over 50 groups across the region that the RTA has agreed to include in their outreach efforts going forward. Lastly, RTA CAB member Lauren Gutierrez, who represents the network advocating against domestic violence on the RTA CAB, provided an update on the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault RTA Public Transportation Assistance Program. She reported that 11,277 of the 25,000 Venture cards the RTA provided for this program have been distributed to approximately 3,311 clients. The network plans on distributing the remainder of the Venture cards by October 2024. She also shared stories about how the Venture cards have helped people get back and forth to medical appointments, court, and therapy appointments. The next meeting will be on Monday, October 28th from 10 o'clock a.m. until noon. I'll be back in November for my next quarterly update. This concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments of Jackie on the domestic violence situation? You know, that is I wouldn't say a pet project, but the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, Chairman Ram Villavam, you know, that's his baby, and he's kind of shepherded that through, and can't thank him enough, not only for his leadership on transit in general, but it's great to hear, you know, that program is working well, and it's just one more example of how everybody benefits from mass transit, whether they know it or not, and that's great. Thank you for that update. Those numbers are sadly impressive. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to item 6C, which is a presentation of the 2024 Community Planning Program of Projects. And Michael Horsting, welcome. Good
morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Michael Horsting, manager of the local planning team here at the RTA. And this morning I wanted to share updates with you on the community planning program here at the RTA, as well as the results of our recent call for projects that was earlier this year. But first, I thought I'd just take a moment about what is the community planning program and a reminder for that. So next slide, please. So for 26 years now, the RTA has supported local governments across the region in planning for and encouraging transit supportive land uses near transit services. Through the community planning program, the RTA provides technical assistance to conduct transit-focused planning studies and plan implementation activities that really advance the RTA's strategic plan, Transit is the Answer. By providing local governments with the technical assistance needed to complete plans, as well as support to implement those plans, the work of the RTA really helps municipalities in the region develop walkable, equitable, sustainable communities near their transit stations and along their transit-served corridors. Every year, we do complete an annual report that summarizes and serves as a summary of previous project awards, as well as recent activities related to the RTA's community planning and access to transit programs. And I invite you to navigate to the community planning page on our website and look for and view this report. The report format is an online story map, which is interactive and allows the reader to scroll and click through visuals, maps, and text that all come together and tell the story of the previous year's successes. For the 2023 report, we did highlight plan and implementation activity of 8 municipalities throughout the region. So next slide, please. On to 2024, we did hold a call for projects earlier this year, February 28 through March 22, in partnership again with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, during which time we received 21 applications from 19 applicants comprised of municipalities and community organizations. RTA staff reviewed and researched each application, interviewed the applicants, discussed the applications with other municipal departments, and solicited feedback on each application from the service boards and other partnering agencies in the region. Applications were evaluated based on their alignment with Transit is the Answer, on the feasibility of the proposed project, on the applicant's ability to implement potential recommendations of each plan, and frankly, their ability to partner with the RTA to complete the work of the study. So next slide, please. So at the May board meeting, we shared with you 8 applicants that were awarded transit station activation grant funding. And today we're sharing with you the following 8 more traditional community planning project awards that will comprise the 2024 program. And they include studying a 6-mile section of the Archer Avenue corridor between Halsted Street and Cicero Avenue in Chicago, including an analysis of 4 Orange Line station areas. Conducting equitable transit-oriented development plans for metro station areas in Hazel Crest and downtown Lockport. The RTA and CMAP are partnering with an award to Maywood to develop a new vision for the Roosevelt Road corridor in their community. Conducting a study of the Dempster Street corridor in Morton Grove, which is served with Pace Pulse service. Updating sections of Itasca's zoning code so it allows the style of development that was envisioned during their downtown strategic planning efforts that were completed through the program a couple of years ago. And then finally, convening a panel of developers who will offer their development advice to Round Lake officials for parcels they own near their metro station and to Waukegan officials for developer-ready parcels near the Waukegan metro station. The total preliminary budget for all 8 of these projects is $877,000, which is comprised of $781,500 in RTA funds and the remaining local match of $95,500 from applicants. As a way of measuring equity in our decision of whether RTA's assistance and funding is being spent, we've identified that 58% of the RTA funding this year is going to those communities that need the help and the support and the assistance the most. So finally, we did conduct a public comment period during the second half of June, during which time 2 favorable comments were received. So this meeting today really concludes our selection process, and we'll continue through the rest of the year advancing these 8 new projects. Next slide, please. So this concludes my presentation this morning. I welcome any comments or any questions you might have.
Any questions or comments? Director Yonan.
This is great. Thank you for the presentation. And, when, I kind of see the different applications on here, I know with just kind of my, past places where, work, the challenge with some of these municipalities is usually they may know this is a project that they would like to undertake. But quite often there is a lot of, roadway infrastructure that becomes sometimes a challenge. And question to you is there been opportunity for you to partner with some of the, other agencies like Cook County? IDOT obviously sometimes defers that, DuPage County. I know we did some corridor studies together, but how is that outreach with some of the road building kind of sides of government?
Director, great question. A lot of the work we do are these corridor plans, corridor studies. And in every case, we put together a group of steering committee members that really guide the work each step of the way for these projects. And we invite those roadway agencies to be part of that conversation. We ask them to sit at the table at key moments throughout the project. So IDOT, Cook County, other county department roadway agencies. So they're really there providing data for us, giving us their perspective on the future of that corridor and helping us work forward recommendations that work for them, but also for the community.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And I know, for Cook County, like a lot of these applications, there's these great grant opportunities, but then the deadlines of when your grant application hits and obviously Cook County has their January to March Invest in Cook grant program and being able to kind of, again, wrap around some of these opportunities, I think is very exciting. So glad to hear that kind of, correspondence and communication and relationships continues to build. So thank you.
Sure. And Cook County specific, we work together. They ask us to review those Invest in Cook applications. We do the same with them once community planning applications come in.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, I know you've done that in the past, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Later on, I know we're going to hear from Rob Nash, who's going to potentially give us some ideas on how to strengthen the RTA's power as we talk about governance with the Senate Transportation Committee and the members of the Illinois House of Representatives. But one of them that's on there, Michael, is to, then is, you know, you run a program that not only is goodwill, but also essentially very needed for our metropolitan region. It's to give you and what you do perhaps more power to make sure that local governments and developers clearly get you what you need so that you can help them, you know, including ETOD, which is, you know, a relatively new term and new power. But you know, one of the ways when we're looking at what we might have as a strengthened RTA under reform and new governance is to really make sure that when you are out there seeking information from units of local government or developers, you've got the teeth to make sure that the data, the survey data, is also very, very accurate. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, 6D is next, and that's the Transit is the Answer update. Leanne's gonna start us off with some opening remarks, and she can introduce the remainder or whoever.
As they're coming
else
up, I'll
is-
get
as the-
started. Yeah, I'm
As they
begging.
walk up, thanks.
Yeah, I'm begging your indulgence a little bit more just to kind of give a little bit of context for sort of what we're going to talk about next, and specifically as you hear from Kyle and Rob in their piece. But as I've noted, we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail around, since our last board meeting, that we've attended several Senate hearings hosted by the Illinois Senate Transportation Committee to really get input on the future of public transit in the region. These hearings come in the wake of legislation that was introduced in the last General Assembly session that recommended merging the service boards and RTA into essentially one mega agency. And that is called in their legislation the Metropolitan Mobility Act, or affectionately the MMA. During the first of these three hearings, Chairman Dillard laid out some, in broad strokes, some alternative governance reform proposal ideas. And his remarks were then subsequently reported in several media outlets. On July 31st, we brought some of these proposals to stakeholders via our 5th quarterly meeting of our Transit is the Answer Coalition. That is essentially a group of riders, stakeholders, advocates, and others that want to, and the service boards as well. So today we're going to be bringing that discussion a little more formally to you for some feedback and input and sort of answer questions that you might have as well. These ideas that were presented at these forums are essentially really to strengthen the RTA by giving the agency, you know, more authority to set regional service standards, deal with fare policy, and as we've talked about in the past, help prioritize capital projects. They're rooted in feedback that we've heard from riders over the course of several years, and really a lot of that came out in the preliminary work for developing the Transit is the Answer strategic plan. So they're not really new ideas. They're ideas that have been on the table and you've heard about in various forums before. We've also, they've also been a topic of conversations that, you know, I've had with the service board leadership. We meet monthly and talk about these kinds of issues and ideas. I guess it's important to note that we're not seeking to strengthen the RTA's authority just for the sake of more power, but instead really to free the service boards up to do what they do best. You heard a lot from Jim today, you know, sort of deliver the services that they are much better experts at being, and really to provide that transit service to riders across our region. This has happened before with the RTA taking on additional responsibilities back in 2008. Some of you were around for some of that legislation, where we were given responsibility for innovation, coordination, and enhancement, or ICE funding programs, and the administration of rolling up really the administration of the reduced fare programs to one regional operation. So we seek increased collaboration and really to ensure that the region maximizes the tremendous value that each of our operators provides on their own. So we don't propose consolidation to preserve the status quo. Sorry, I'll try that line again to be clear. We do not oppose consolidation to preserve the status quo. We instead believe that and have stated on many occasions, that we agree that the future funding must come with reform, but we, the RTA and the service boards, do not believe that consolidation is the right path forward. We are deeply concerned that full consolidation has the potential to disrupt important progress being made on improving the rider experience, as well as to create a system that does not reflect important local perspectives and does not represent the region equitably or fairly. So just really, I think it's important just to have that context as we embark on the conversations that you'll hear a little bit more from the guys to my right. So look forward to that input as we get a little bit further into the Rob and Kyle part of the conversation. But with that, I will turn it over to Peter, who will give you some updates.
Thanks, Leanne. Thank you all. Good morning. My name is Peter Kirsten, and I'm a program manager working on plan implementation. As always, we have a couple topics to cover and multiple people, and we'll introduce ourselves as we go. The introduction there was more about the second half of the update. First, I'm going to share about a project that we're in the process of completing. Go ahead to the next slide. Today I'll be sharing about the economic impact assessment that we've completed with consultant support and through partnership with service board planning staff. So this project is iterative from modeling and analysis that was done as part of development of Transit as the Answer. The goal of the project were to convert the $730 million fiscal cliff number, as well as the $1.5 billion expansion funding scenario that is proposed in the PART report, to kind of translate that into impacts on the service that the service boards operate, people, how riders would be impacted, the economy, and other factors that would be felt. So we're focusing on year one impacts. So kind of a 2026 baseline, and then looking at the cliff and then an expansion scenario. As we've seen in other work done by institutions like Argonne, in partnership with CTA, the downstream impacts continue into the future years, which makes the fiscal cliff and kind of truly an existential question for transit. The end product of RTA's work is a tool to continue to deliver the message of how critical sustainable funding is to the region and to amplify what's at stake at the hearings and in discussions with elected leaders. So for example, some of the high level results from this analysis have already been included in the chairman's and Leanne's testimonies in some of the recent hearings. Go ahead to the next slide. So our process began earlier this year by first kind of estimating the service level impacts with planners from each service board. Then internally, RTA estimated ridership changes based on two different scenarios, again, the cliff and expansion, and comparing that to a baseline projection. Our consultant on the project is Cambridge Systematics, and then they use the in-plan economic modeling tool to kind of translate these changes into really broad things like regional GDP, job losses and gains, as well as tax revenue and other factors. Then lastly, we kind of rolled it all up to do a comparison, put these things side by side, as well as using the Remix platform to kind of understand how these impacts might be spread inequitably across the region, looking specifically there at job access. Next slide. So the in-plan economic model is a software product. It measures economic impacts from data representing actual economies. So for this study, this is modeled on the 6-county RTA service region and is really just looking at the impacts that would be contained within there. The analysis presents the total impact of the fiscal cliff using the 5 measures that you see on screen here. So employment or job losses and gains, labor income, what are the wages and benefits paid to people. That money is then circulated through the economy and has all sorts of additional impacts. Value added, which is expressed often as GDP for the region. Output, which is GDP plus all of the intermediate expenditures in that model, and then tax revenue. What are the changes that we can expect in taxes on the cliff side and the expansion side? Again, all of this is local to the RTA 6 counties. Go ahead to the next slide. So the main message here is that 2026 will really be a critical, pivotal point in the future. The chart on screen is showing broad regional ridership decline and then recovery from 2019 levels. So in early 2026, we anticipate nearly all federal COVID relief funding will have been expended, indicated on the second circle on the screen here. And then two paths emerge going forward. Absent sustainable funding for transit operations, the system falls off the fiscal cliff. Dramatic service cuts that we'll go into in a moment lead to immediate drops in ridership, setting the system back. Or the other path, we invest in our region, securing sustainable funding. Ridership continues to grow with more service on the street. We connect more people to jobs and opportunities. We take more cars off the road. The message here is clear. There's a choice to make, and the rest of the presentation is going to kind of contrast the impacts of this choice, comparing the cliff to expansion of the system. Go ahead to the next slide. So the first thing we need to understand is the kind of year one impacts that riders will face. Again, this was developed with service board planning staff. So a 20% cut to the regional operating budget results in a much larger service cut of roughly 30 to 40%. Similarly, if we fill the budget gap and increase funding, a 20% expansion in operation funds mirrors with a 30 to 40% service increase. So these impacts are dramatic. On the left-hand side of your screen, a bus rider in the city will see a 25-minute headway for what used to be 15. In the suburbs, a 45-minute turns into over an hour wait for a single bus ride. If you live in a community served by a Metra line, a line running 90 trains per day is cut down to 54. Whereas on the expansion side, a line carrying 90 trains a day expands to over 120. Making it much more likely that Metra is going to kind of be able to realize their vision of regional rail. Go to the next slide. So while the service cuts of the cliff scenario, we intentionally kind of spread them evenly. There's no individual route or line that is eliminated, but we're spreading this like peanut butter across the entire system. That doesn't necessarily mean that the impacts would be spread the same way. So again, using the Remix platform, we looked at community areas within the city of Chicago, as well as municipalities in suburban Cook and then the collar counties, to determine how these service cut impacts how they would impact job access. So again, you're kind of looking at, in a 60-minute transit ride, how many jobs can I get to on average from my community area? So in neighborhoods within the city like Roseland and West Ridge, these are both communities further from the urban core, job access reduces by as much as 32% from current level. These are areas where transit is an equalizer, taking people to opportunity that exists outside of their community. In Lakeview, on the dense part of the north side of the city, the job access reduction is much lower. It's only 5%. This is due to both the abundance of transit within that community, but also how much more just development and density there is in Lakeview. The impacts, though, are still going to be substantial in a place like Lakeview. So a 40% reduction in service will produce dramatic overcrowding at key stations like Belmont, which serves the red, brown, and purple lines. Key bus routes like Halstead and Clark wouldn't have the capacity to carry current ridership levels with a 40% reduction in service. So the dense north side of the city, which is very well served by transit today, is likely going to grind to a halt as more people rely on cars to make trips that they previously had made on the transit system. Looking into suburban communities, the impacts are honestly kind of similar. So in Bridgeview, in suburban Cook, or Waukegan in Lake County, both communities where PACE serves riders that also connect to rail, a typical resident could see their job access reduced by as much as 46%. Again, transit is connecting people to opportunity outside of where they live in these communities. Whereas other communities that have great service directly in, Addison and Naperville and DePage, could see smaller declines, 9 and 17% respectively in job access. But again, similarly, a 40% reduction in service means fewer express trains on the BN into the city. Riders can expect crush loads at stations like Naperville and Route 59. Suburban workers can't get downtown to jobs and are likely going to end up resorting to cars and get on to the already congested expressways into the city. Go ahead to the next slide. So again, kind of going back to the comparisons here, we'll get into a couple of the more economic impacts. Again, in year one, these impacts are dramatic. So on the left-hand side is the cliff, on the right-hand side is expansion. The region sustains a $2.6 billion loss in GDP. That's largely driven by about 27,000 estimated jobs that are lost in year one. These are both at the transit agencies and then all of the vendors and contracting companies that are downstream of the operating and capital budgets. Workers throughout the region lose out on about $1 billion in wages, and this is all, again, in just year one of the fiscal cliff. Conversely, an expanded system grows our economy by 2.7 billion. We add roughly the same as the loss size, so 28,000 jobs. And workers are taking home much of that investment in our system in the form of wages that are then, circulated again through the economy. So the most important kind of takeaway here for legislators is that, the 730 million gap, the 1.5 billion a year funding investment shouldn't just be looked at as a cost. The cost from not funding our cliff will lead to these higher societal and economic costs by easily in 3 to 4 times, the dollar value of the investment. Go ahead to the next slide. So these trends are similar in terms of tax revenue. On the left-hand side of the screen, $372 million lost in taxes collected in the 6-county region. $50 million in lost productivity from time spent sitting in congestion. And $41 million lost in educational benefit from students lacking transportation access to schools and universities. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, obviously comparable gains from the expansion. Go ahead to the next slide. So just focusing on congestion for a second here, since transit as the answer was adopted, our traffic has only gotten worse. In a recent INRIX report, Chicago now ranks 5th worldwide and 2nd in the United States for congestion, costing the typical driver of our region about $1,672 a year in lost time and productivity just sitting in traffic. The fiscal cliff scenario would add an additional 366 million vehicle miles to these statistics, ensuring additional cost to our economy in terms of health, lost productivity. Alternatively, the expansion scenario could alleviate some congestion, taking about 289 million miles of vehicle traffic off of regional roads. Go ahead to the next slide. So lastly, these same trends are observed in public assistance and healthcare. Job losses grow needs for assistance program like unemployment. Healthcare costs increase, largely driven by more drivers on the road getting into crashes, polluting the air that we breathe. Contrasted on the right-hand side of the screen with big savings. Go ahead to the next slide. So while the previous slides kind of make clear the immediate impacts, what happens in year one, it's important to reiterate that going off of the fiscal cliff is really just it's not just year one. It's really just the beginning of a negative feedback cycle. So revenue shortfalls grow with each year. This becomes the new normal. Each additional year of less revenue produces cuts in service, which again lowers ridership, and it's just kind of the cycle. Year one losses see this 30 to 40% cut in service spread across the board, but each year following, we'll see more and dramatic cuts to service across the region. Next slide. So my last slide here, each impact we quantified is linear. GDP, job losses, decreases in wages, increases in public assistance, all of these things grow over time. This problem only gets harder and less possible to solve the longer that we wait to take action. One way or another, this analysis makes clear that the region will pay these costs. That's either in the form of jobs and economic losses, or the region can grow through investment in an expanded system and reap the benefits well beyond kind of the total cost. So I'll pause here. That was a lot of information. Take any questions or comments from board members before passing it over to Kyle.
Any questions or comments, Director Carey?
Thank you, Peter. A lot of information there. Is all the data, the results from this online somewhere? The stats you're reading?
We'll definitely make these slides available. There is a lot behind it. We're still in the process of kind of sharing that out, but if you'd like to see more, we can certainly
Okay.
provide more.
Okay. And then, where you talk about this slide, fall off the fiscal cliff, 20%. So that's year one, 20%, budget reduction and a service cut of 30-40%.
Correct, yeah.
And you say expanding, and then the expand the system is 20% budget increase. Is that right in your, is that plugging the 730 million gap and adding another 20%?
Correct.
On top of that?
Correct.
Okay, okay. And again, that would be a year one projection.
Correct.
That it would increase.
Yeah, and
Okay.
in both scenarios, the service changes are within kind of what exists today.
Right.
So we're not saying any, big expansions. It's really about how many buses and trains are we running on the system
Okay.
that we have right
Okay.
now.
All right. And we don't really do a scenario, because it'd just be back to where we've been, is just plugging the $730 million. And then we're just kind of where we've been before and we can't expand.
Right.
So you didn't model that, right?
That was not part of the exercise here,
Right.
correct?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you might have already answered this, but my question was going to be, if we anticipate increased revenue from more service, can we start doing that earlier than when we reach the fiscal cliff? But it sounded like you said the year one expansion would just be maintaining the current service level.
Are you just going back to the side by side in service levels of cliff versus expansion?
No, the graphic. Here, the expansion is after the fiscal cliff.
Oh, and the
And I'm saying
ridership
if we-
projection.
Right.
Right,
Oh,
right.
okay. But is there a way that we could increase service now to demonstrate the effects of what we're proposing, that it would actually work?
I mean, the efforts are being made, like Metra was here talking about where they have added service and have seen ridership gains, as well as other things they're doing to innovate and gain more riders. But the relationship is not direct enough to be able to pay for that service, to gain enough ridership, for it to be sustainable. Once the COVID relief money is gone, it wouldn't be possible.
And I think a short answer way to think about that is we need more money to add more service. And so if the legislature came up with, or someone came up with more money for us today, we could start plugging that in and you might see some opportunities before we fall off the fiscal cliff, but it's correlated directly to additional revenues needed.
Okay, thank you.
Director Ross.
Trying to understand, I guess, who the target audience is for this report. I'm thinking the legislature probably understands all of this, but I'm trying to figure out how you convert this information so that the general public understands it. What does productivity loss mean to me when I'm sitting at my kitchen table in Joliet talking to my wife about, going over the cliff here?
Yeah, productivity loss just means sitting in your car on I-55 because there isn't a good way to get into into the city on transit, is the alternative. So I agree, this is, it's made by economists. It's our challenge is to translate it into what it means for riders. And productivity is probably not the term we would use when using it to talk to a rider about what these impacts are. But that's what that means, is that without good, reliable transit service that is frequent, that is useful for people, we will see more people move to cars, we will see more people stuck in traffic, and you will spend more time waiting in your car to get where you need to go than we would if you were on a train.
And I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. How you do that conversion, I think, matters where the public is concerned, because they can't quantify these numbers in a way that relates directly to them. I'm a former educator, but I don't know what education benefit loss means.
I mean, that's the ability to access educational opportunities. So again, it's transit access, like direct access to a facility. But then also, you know, when you go back to the earlier ones, the job losses, GDP, and wages, all of those inputs into our economy have an impact on how many people seek educational benefits. If you're employed or if your employer has an opportunity for you to seek additional education. Again, this is an economist view of the world, and I think the big numbers are kind of what's most effective in the message, and that's where I think you'll see us stick to in the roadshow with this. But great feedback on where we may need to sharpen it a little bit.
Yeah, and another concern I have, I guess, is that the number is so large that the average person says, wow, this number's so big, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Why be concerned?
That's great feedback as well. I think we'll go back and work on sharpening this up a bit.
Thank you.
And I think just to echo what Peter said at the top end, I mean, the legislature is essentially our first and primary kind of audience on this. I mean, these are questions we're getting at the hearings, like what does this mean for our region and our state? And so that's what this initial sort of cut of output from this analysis is sort of oriented towards. But yeah, I think and I think that was sort of a point I think Director Carey was getting to, how do we translate this into sort of more usable data for taxpayers and residents of the region and individuals.
Director Ross, one of the things they asked for, the legislature, as well as the business groups, what are you gonna do with the money? You know, and a bullet point, I think, is it's gonna take an extra 15 minutes a day to take your kids to and from school, to activities. I mean, we're gonna have to put together some bullet points that show what we're gonna do with this money. Because they're asking, what are you gonna do with the money? And we're gonna have to have some specifics as to what we're gonna do with it. Other questions or comments for Peter? Yes, Director Melvin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let's just start by saying I'm totally in favor of funding the whole system, right? I mean, I think we have to, as a region, as a city, and things like that. But relative to what Director Gathing was asking, I mean, we just heard, you know, Jim from Metra say that they've got this relationship, this dialogue situation set up with different corporations, but there's no impact because there's no way to grow because there's still this debate going on about how many people are actually going to come back to work. So how does that factor into your assumptions about growth? So you add more service, but if people aren't getting on the trains, how does it work?
Yeah, it's a challenge. The ridership forecasting that we did, we took kind of a different approach to it of differentiating between weekday types, because I think that's a really big driver here. And Jim acknowledged this as well. Of Mondays and Fridays have always been a little bit smaller than Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but they're even a little smaller now than in kind of whatever the new normal is. So that's very much so accounted for in the way that we projected ridership, of looking at a 5-day week as kind of 5 individual days, not just every weekday is the same. And then on the flip side of that, you know, Metra in particular has seen excellent growth on the weekend ridership. Kind of speaking to, you know, some of the things they're trying to accomplish with a regional rail style service model of like, this is not just useful for people coming downtown. But you know, kind of more visionary of how many riders could we attract if we're running a service that matches a whole host of needs and a whole host of rider types. So it's a challenge. Anyone that I think is claiming to know what ridership is going to look like or what ridership could be, is forecasting, like, you know, where this is definitely like a moment in time where I think, and that was part of the approach we took. Was just acknowledging how rapidly things are changing right now. We had to kind of adjust our tools at points in this project. But it is, you know, something we're actively working on.
Let me add one comment. Jim talked about how the more events and stuff like that they're seeing people use transportation for. We live in the city. My kids and I use CTA as sort of the go-to thing. we see lots more people on the weekends going to events using CTA. The buses are crowded some days when we get on to go across town to do something and stuff like that. I'm seeing, personally, just seeing a lot more of that.
Yeah, it's great.
Right. Leanne, do you want me to just pause this 6B, the transit is the
No, I think
answer?
we can finish
Be-
up this presentation. We're just,
We just gotta get to our action items because we have a member or two that may need to leave. Okay, let's just keep going. Transit is the answer. Hi, Kyle.
Hello, Chairman and members of the board. Kyle Whitehead with the RTA Government Affairs team. Here to share a recap of a recent meeting of our Transit is the Answer Coalition. The meeting was designed to inform our legislative strategy surrounding the fiscal cliff. After my presentation, Rob will talk through what our legislative team has planned leading up to the 2025 session of the General Assembly. Next slide, please. So our coalition met virtually on July 31st to provide feedback on potential reforms to improve service and accountability for riders. More than 140 riders, agency staff, legislative staff, advocates, staff from the service boards, and other stakeholders participated, our largest coalition meeting to date. The goal was to help people envision what a stronger RTA could look like and invite them to join the conversation with the legislature about what types of reforms could be paired with sustainable funding to achieve meaningful progress. The agenda for the meeting included updates on ridership and new fare initiatives, as well as legislative developments. We then walked through proposed reform concepts and collected feedback on those concepts in breakout groups. The meeting ended with an open question and answer session. Next slide. Before diving into a discussion about proposed reforms, we talked through the legislative context and what brought us to this point. To highlight the value of transit and gather input on funding and reform ideas, Senate Transportation Committee Chair Senator Ram Bilavalam has been hosting a series of 6 subject matter hearings to be held over the summer to continue the conversation about the future of transit in the region. The hearings come after legislation was introduced that proposes the consolidation of CTA, Metra, PACE, and RTA into a new transit authority, the Metropolitan Mobility Authority, or MMA. We told the coalition that the RTA does not support full consolidation because we don't believe it's the most effective way to improve service and accountability for riders. It's important to remember that the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, the part report developed by CMAP, outlines 2 possible options for transit governance. One envisions consolidating the RTA and the service boards into one regional entity, and the other envisions a stronger RTA with more influence and more oversight on service, fare policy, and capital project prioritization. These are areas where RTA's regional perspective and budgetary role could add value for riders and taxpayers. The rest of our coalition meeting focused on what implementation of a stronger RTA could look like. For each possible reform, we looked at what's happening currently and what could change to improve service and improve accountability for riders. Next slide. The first concept we discussed was regional service standards. Currently, each service board sets policy standards specific to modes and the part of the region they serve. Riders, for the most part, travel on 3 separate systems, and the schedules don't always align when you need to transfer between them. A potential reform is for RTA to define regional service standards for minimum levels of service for each mode of travel and ensure a basic level of access to transit for all residents. This could include additional accountability, such as requiring operating agencies to testify quarterly to the RTA board on how they are meeting these standards and answer questions from the regional board. To be clear, the RTA would not be planning service, and the service boards would retain control over routes and schedules. Rather, we would use a regional lens to evaluate the impact of various transit services and identify areas where improvements may be needed. A regional service standard and regional accountability could position the agencies to better serve riders beyond jurisdictional boundaries, to make sure that we're balancing suburban needs with the needs of the urban core, and that we're delivering a reliable system that people can count on, a key goal from Transit is the Answer. Next slide. The second concept we discussed with the coalition was a regional fare policy. Currently, each service board sets fare levels and policy individually. In recent years, there have been huge successes at increasing affordability and integration because of flexible federal funds. This includes price and pass modifications to reflect how people are using the system differently, expansion of reduced fare programs to ensure the system remains affordable, and integrating passes to make it easier to travel across modes and operators. Establishing a regional fare policy could help ensure that we offer simple, easy to understand fares and fare programs, and that we continue to be good stewards of public resources. The RTA is well positioned to lead the development of this policy, given our role overseeing the regional operating budget and our ability to evaluate how different transit fare structures are working for riders across the region. A real regional fare policy could keep us on track in making paying for transit more seamless for everyone, while improving affordability for those who need it most. Again, a stated goal of our strategic plan. Next slide. The last reform concept we discussed was capital project prioritization. Currently, projects and programs are determined by the service boards. RTA plays an oversight role through the budget process and the capital program. We evaluate progress towards regional goals, but for the most part, these decisions are made individually at each service board, and the regional perspective is inserted too late in the process. Increasingly, competitive federal funding opportunities want to see regional vision and coordination in projects. For example, Transit is the answer set a goal for advancing BRT, as we've discussed earlier in the meeting. We need a regional voice to ensure that we're partnering with cities, counties, the state, and roadway agencies to prioritize moving people through busy corridors, not just cars. A strong regional agency setting the vision and taking the lead on key federal and state grant applications for capital projects could ensure we are maximizing the benefits transit brings to the region, be that through climate action and GHG reduction, investment dollars helping boost local economies, or being good stewards of our existing infrastructure. Next slide. After presenting each reform concept, we broke the coalition into groups and collected feedback through facilitated discussion. Riders were generally supportive of the reforms and eager to talk about how the system could change and improve. They understand how the proposed reforms could address some of the core issues riders face every day, and pushed RTA to be bold in our advocacy on behalf of the region's transit riders. Here's some of the points that stood out from the feedback discussions. On regional service standards, riders expressed a clear desire for all three operating agencies to align schedules and make transfers seamless and affordable across the system. On regional fare policy, several coalition members called for agencies to embrace fare capping and ensure that riders who can only afford to pay per trip never pay more than the cost of a daily, weekly, or monthly pass. On capital project prioritization, riders said state of good repair projects should take priority over expansion to make sure existing service is fast and reliable. They also pointed to BRT, bus rapid transit, as an efficient way to expand the region's rapid transit network. RTA staff will incorporate this feedback into our ongoing conversations with legislators and stakeholders about what a stronger RTA could look like and which reforms are most effective at improving service and improving accountability for riders. Now I'll pass it over to Rob to talk through RTA's next steps in advocating for sustainable funding and the reforms we just discussed.
Next slide, please. Hi, I am Rob Nash, Director of Government Affairs at the RTA. I'm going to walk you through some of the interactions we had with the legislature over the summer and those planned for into the fall. Next slide, please. As Colin mentioned, we plan to incorporate feedback from the coalition into our ongoing conversations with legislators and stakeholders about sustainable funding and reform. Chairman Dillard and Leanne have spoken at each of the first 3 Senate hearings, the most recent being last Friday in Naperville, and Director Ross was there as well. We remain in regular contact with House and Senate leadership and the governor's office. For any of you who have had the opportunity to review some of the recordings, and we can make those available to anyone who has not seen them, there are always a number of questions from lawmakers and specific data requests that happen on the mic and in conversations after those meetings. So there's a constant flow of information going back and forth, including individual briefings on specific topics that are sort of outside of the hearing structure that we've embarked upon, as those sort of interests have been revealed in the back and forth in the public hearings. Over the next few months, we plan to ramp up our outreach to all members of the General Assembly in the RTA region and many of the business community, civic, and advocacy groups with a stake in the future of the transit system. We continue to build support for sustainable operations funding and a stronger RTA to improve service and accountability across the region. And to the conversation about some of the data that Peter presented on the economic impacts, one of the the challenges, as Director Ross noted and Director Carey, is distilling that information down to, accessible. What does it mean for me and my family? But a lot of the points that Peter made have provided a lot of good ammunition, particularly for folks who don't use the system. Many times people seem dismissive of the concern if they don't rely on the system or their community isn't well served. And so why do I have to concern myself with it at all? Well, you sit in traffic longer, you breathe dirtier air, you waste more of your time, even if you never get on the system as the system deteriorates. And so that's a key comment that we have to make. It's not just what means for me if I ride the system, which includes better, more frequent service, but what does it mean for everyone in the region, whether they're on it regularly or not at all? So that's an important challenge that we'll continue to take to heart as we have these conversations. Some key upcoming dates include the final 3 Senate hearings on August 28th, which will focus on public health, September 18th, where we'll discuss climate impacts, and then October 16th, tentatively scheduled for Springfield, where there'll be a wider discussion on funding. While some of the details have not been set by Senate committee staff at this date, we do believe that will also involve a conversation about downstate transit needs as well. A couple other dates. Election Day is November 5th. For those of you who weren't aware, we're having an election this year. And General Assembly veto session is scheduled for November 12th through the 14th and November 19th through the 21st, which is an accelerated timetable from most years, and an interesting timetable given that it'll come on the immediate heels of the election. Chairman Dillard and other members of the board have been part of the conversations with lawmakers at these hearings. And I know, as Leanne mentioned, there's been discussion about funding and reform ideas. So I just wanted to see, Chairman, if you wanted to offer any comments on your conversations, because I know you've had some direct engagement with lawmakers, particularly on the reforms that you've testified to at the hearings.
Yeah, no, for the sake of time, I'll kind of pass. I just mentioned, we have started to lay out some of the additional powers that the RTA might use in our reform discussions with the legislature. And they've been fairly positive. One thing, I touched on it. They want a list of what we're going to do with the money. And Peter, your presentation's very helpful, but I think they really want some specifics, including, anecdotal things that you're not going to spend. You're going to spend more time taking your kids to and from their soccer games or whatever. They want a real list of that, including Director Gathing probably will be able to hire more operators for, bus drivers and operators for the L and provide additional service. So, they want to see a dot point list of what are we going to do with more money, which leads to Peter's economic analysis. So, can't thank you, Rob, Tina, Kyle, Anthony's back there, as well as our lobby team has done just a superb job, because there's a lot of bases to touch and legislators have a lot of questions, and you all are doing a great job navigating these uncharted waters. Let's put it that way. So thank you. Yes, Director Lewis.
I just want to make sure I understand, and I hope I didn't miss it. I know we've talked a lot about the structure and actually the process that we are proposing in terms of the infrastructure. But the other side of the coin is we've got this impending fiscal issue. So is the legislature asking for us to come up with a plan for how we're going to oversee this and set the conversation aside in terms of how we're going to fund it? Or are the two going to come together in some meaningful way at a point in time?
Well, the two need to come together because you can't really plan for, service levels without understanding the resources that you're going to have available to deliver the service. The Senate process has been very specific on different topic areas, primarily to, I think, highlight and define the value of transit. But it is, at least as we sit here today, intended to close on the conversation around funding. I will tell you, though, that I think the detailed conversation on funding components is likely to not really get going in earnest until the General Assembly comes back into session.
So the work that we're doing now needs to be supplemented by that conversation as well?
Yeah, and I don't want to infer that the conversations about revenue haven't been ongoing. That both our strategic plan, CMAP strategic plan, list a number of revenue options that the General Assembly could consider and tries to project both the amount of revenue they would generate and then sort of the ease with which we could implement some of those proposals. And so there's a lot of feedback going back and forth on that. Revenue obviously inherently is a political conversation. And so I think we've tried to be a resource of information to lawmakers as they start weighing those different options. But we're sincere in saying we're agnostic about the specific sources they choose to access for the system. We just want them to be sustainable, predictable, hopefully growing and stable. But that conversation, to be honest, has not gotten into the details as we have on the reforms to this point.
Thank you.
Carrie.
First of all, I want to say, excuse me, that I feel like over the last number of months since the MA bill was released, that you have done a great job, all of staff and you, Rob, and the whole team, of moving towards more specificity of what we can put forward as an alternative to the MMA bill, to putting it all together and becoming a little more assertive and aggressive. And I totally support that. I think we need to have you know better than I do, how to make it all work when we're, you're talking to the state folks. But we need to have a strong voice. We're asking and proposing that there's a better way than trying to put it all together, that will be expensive, it'll be complex, it'll be take an enormous amount of time, and it'll be very difficult, and it's been proposed before and it's never happened. So there are better ways. I mean, you go back to the part report, it's right there. So I think we need to have a fairly strong voice in putting that argument forward. So that's number one. And then I have kind of a specific, there's 3 major areas that are listed: regional service standards, fair policy, and capital project prioritization. And what I'd like to add to that, or have you all think about it, at least in terms, because what I think it was Kyle or Peter that described it, the way you described it, it was more than capital project prioritization. So I would like to see the word planning in there somewhere, so that the RTA is the agency that looks overall. So we see the DuSable, project, or we see the Chicago, and Halstead project with BRT. So if CTA is busy running the business and running the trains and the buses, we can come in and look at it from a higher level. And maybe something like the Chicago Halstead thing, we would have seen that earlier. So I think that is an important role for us. And I'd like to see it kind of worked in there if possible. Thank you.
It's a great suggestion in terms of wording. Director Ross.
I participated in several of the Transit the Answer Coalition meetings, and I just want to compliment our staff. Those are substantive meetings, great ideas coming in, and our staff just handles, especially the breakout sessions, I think, very adeptly. So my compliments to all of you. Those are not easy discussions. Obviously, you have some people who are not terribly happy with the system and have some suggestions that maybe go beyond what's reasonable or doable. But our staff, I think, just handle it very, very well. So my compliments to all of you.
And it's important. I think the public needs to know we take input. 140 individuals had input last time. Director Melvin.
I have a really kind of a question, because and this touches on what JD asked too, which was sort of, what do you say to people about what you're getting for all the money, and Director Gathing too, so what can we do to improve things right away? How about safety and cleanliness? So I was in New York last week, and we were at Grand Central going to Hudson Yards, right? Rather than get on the number 7, one stop away, we took a car, because I'm with my wife and kids, and it's just not safe. It's not clean, right? Particularly in the denser parts of the system. So what part of what the success of the system is that it's popular because people like to use it. So when you spend all this money, I guess the question is, can we improve the popularity of the system if it's seen as broadly safe and clean? Right? Frankfurt, easy to do, right? Because it's safe and clean. London's easy to do. New York's a little scary. And sometimes I think people have some hesitancy about parts of Chicago. It's not always user-friendly. And so it's more of a question really about popularity of the system and how that whole thing might work.
You know, one of the first coalition event that we focused on after the completion of the strategic plan was Safety and Security Summit to talk about some of those issues, bringing in folks from other systems to highlight some of the challenges they face. It's somewhat cold comfort, but if we do compare it to some of these other systems, we are, you know, I think folks from LA would testify that some of the challenges they face are more intense than they are in the city of Chicago. But that doesn't mean much to folks that are experiencing it on a daily basis. The perception is the reality they have to live with. We have seen, and I think the service boards have testified to this fact that as ridership increases, crime and sort of, I hesitate to use the term crime, inappropriate behavior is probably more of the complaint that folks have. It's not so much while we have issues of violent crime, it's really sort of public nuisance and inappropriate behavior. We have seen those continue to decline, particularly on CTA. I think the President Carter has talked extensively at the hearings. He gets this question despite the topics that are supposed to be the focus of the day, just about every hearing. And he has talked about it and I think is actually slated to present a little bit more detail on some of their plans for not just how to better utilize Chicago Police Department resources, but some of their own resources that might focus on the human services needs of individuals on the system. You know, they're spending significant amounts of money doing that and have continued to add to those sort of security guard resources and those human services resources. It is a perception that we have to deal with, but it is important to remember that, you know, the experience on the transit system reflects the society at large, right? Crime is not a unique problem on the system. In fact, you're less likely to confront crime in the system than you are at large, but it travels with, you know, the community. And so it's a challenge that we take seriously. It's certainly something that the lawmakers have asked us repeatedly on, and I know that the chairman has made a lot of comment and has done some work within the mayor's office to try and encourage greater Chicago Police Department resources to be dedicated to the system on a regular basis.
And they also ask about ambassadors, Director Melvin, at the last hearing too. Director Groven.
I just want to build off of where Director Carey was going. I think first, this is fantastic. When you're putting together these kind of very tangible views of what it could mean one direction or the other, is great work. I've been impressed with this crew. The people that are putting these numbers together have done so in our strategic work in the past and around COVID and all that. So very impressed. I think with what we're getting from the coalition, what we're getting from this kind of work, we have not only the opportunity to share a view forward, but not an opportunity, but a responsibility to put in front of the lawmakers answers to some of those questions. But what are you going to do with the money and where can we go from here? And I think, given all those inputs that we have, the efforts that we've made in the past, we're uniquely suited to say, this actually is a good path forward, and here's why. So I'm just reinforcing the point to say, let's put this really good work to use to answer those questions. Because people see the big picture, they see, yep, there's a fiscal cliff, but where are we going to go with it? And I think we have some answers. Let's make sure we get them, you know, kind of foot forward and help to answer those questions.
Chairman, Dr. Sagar has his hand up.
Dr. Sagar.
Thanks, Chairman. I just want to say I strongly support some of the commentary from Director Ross in terms of expressing gratitude and support for the efforts of you, Chairman, as well as our staff leadership and Rob in terms of the discussions which have been held to point. And I want to thank you and commend you all for that. The other thing I want to do is say that I strongly support as well Director Carey's commentary with regards to a very important addition to, I think, the commentary that needs to be a proactive planning, prioritization aspect of of the efforts that we can provide as a strong directional visionary team. And so I want us to make sure that we don't I guess, sell that particular aspect. I think that's incredibly important. So I appreciate Director Carey raising that function. Thank you.
Both Brian and Pat, I brought up to the committee on Friday that our leader, our executive director, is actually a planning graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So planning, in terms of the way we do it, your comments are well taken. Need to put the planning component out there. Any other questions or comments for this panel? Thank you all very, very much. All right, let's move on to some action items. Item 7A is the quarterly performance report and resolution certifying the financial results for the second quarter of 2024. Alex coming up, Sarah Rubino's stepping up, and excellent.
Morning, Chairman and members of the board. I'm Maulik Vaishnav, Deputy Executive Director of Planning and Capital Programming. I'll be providing some information on the performance measures omnibus update that we have been doing in advance of the financial quarterly certification. So my part is information only, and then I'll pass it on to Sarah with the part that you'll be voting on. Next slide, please. And I'll go faster to save us some time. But as you recall, we have been coming to you for the last couple of quarters with updates on how the service boards have to meet the omnibus data requirements that were passed over a year ago, specifically on providing monthly data on staffing, service, and safety components as required by the bill. Our role here is that you will vote on the substantial completion of this annually, so not right now, but at the end of the year. But because it's a new requirement, we have been working with service boards, making sure they're providing the data and then following up with you with updates. Next slide, please. So we'll just quickly share some screenshots of the performance web pages that all three agencies have now uploaded and continue to make updates to meet the requirements. So CTA's dashboard has seen significant updates again. We had a couple of public comments. If you remember the last time we presented this, I met with the folks who made the public comment, and I'm happy to report that there are a couple of additions here that address some of the comments they made to you. So in addition to some cosmetic changes, a lot of new information has been added to CTA's site. So we'll show you a couple of those specific items. Next slide, please. So one of the additions is the access wait times at bus stops. So when a bus is supposed to arrive at a certain bus stop based on a schedule versus when it actually ends up arriving, what is the difference for the rider to have waited? So CTA has added a lot of information at what's called a time point level. A bus route has about 6 to 12 time points along the way. As you know, CTA has over 10,000 bus stops and thousands of trips a day. You can imagine that matrix would be insanely large to provide publicly. So this is a really good place to end up with public information on a route level, time point level, and even on a day level of what the access wait time has been. So in future, we'll actually focus on talking about the data and how things are going. But right now, I'm focusing on all the information that's being provided so far. Next slide, please. The other aspect that we had heard about was the rail schedule versus delivered trips that CTA provide, what the scheduled information is with the number of trips actually delivered, so people can compare the two than just looking at percentages. So here you see a couple of screenshots of the system and the red line on a weekday of what is scheduled and what's being provided with the level of detail. If people hover over these data points, they can see on a weekly or a daily basis of how many trips are scheduled versus provided during that time, going back about a year. Next slide, please. Moving to Metra quickly. when we spoke to you last, Metra had not yet released their dashboard publicly, but we had showed you a couple of screenshots. So now the dashboard is up, so I'm happy to report that. They have 6 months of data posted this is showing some information on their scheduled and completed trips by line and how they are doing. There is also on the next slide, if we go to that, information on, again, excess wait time, similar measures that we just talked about with CTA, how much people have to wait when an actual train is delayed compared to the schedule. And they will have to continue to make some additional updates to fill out all of the requirements. For example, the upcoming additions will include more data on staffing and security that currently are not on their dashboard just yet. Next slide, please. And finally, on PACE, we showed you back when they had just released their dashboard with January data. Happy to report now they have several additional months of data being reported on employee staff positions, how many folks they have lost to attrition, and a lot of the requirements they need to meet here. Next slide, please. And here's another example of PACE providing really detailed information on each route. People can download a spreadsheet and see on a daily basis how their buses are arriving earlier on time or later by each bus stop on a route. So they'll continue to make additional enhancements in terms of how riders can see this information. And so we'll continue to bring that to you in future updates. Next slide, please. So here are the links for folks who would like to go see them. The requirement is that the service boards themselves have to host these on their website, and we'll continue to spend some time in the next few months to seek more public comment. Folks can already go to these dashboards and reach out to the agencies if they have comments, but we'll continue to do that more proactively in the next couple of months. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah Rubino to walk you through the financial part that you'll vote on. Happy to take any questions now.
The source of the data, is it proprietary for each individual service entity, or is there some third party that we use that provides the data for each of the entities?
That's a good question. So there are pieces that are completely, HR data of how they're staffing positions, software with GPS coming off of buses that show where buses are so they can process ridership and location. But some of that does have components of potential vendors who provide that to the agencies, but really the owner of the data is the agency itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Malik. Good morning, Chairman Dillard and directors. I'm Sarah Rubino, a principal analyst here in the Budget Division. Today, I'll be asking the board to certify the service board's financial results through the second quarter of 2024 against the adopted operating budgets. First, let's look at our primary metric for evaluating substantial accordance. That's the operating deficit performance. The favorable trend continued through June for CTA, Metra, and PACE suburban service, while ADA paratransit has an unfavorable result as the ridership and purchase transportation expense both exceeded budget. If this trend continues for ADA paratransit, additional funding could be needed for 2024. This would be addressed toward year end by utilizing the ADA paratransit reserve fund, subject to board approval. PACE suburban service continues to experience very favorable results versus budget. We had seen a declining monthly trend in the variance here, but that ended with the June results. Despite extensive recruiting efforts, PACE headcount remains about 250 full-time employees, or 13% below budgeted levels. This in turn has led to lower than budgeted labor expense, while fuel, insurance, and other expense categories have also been favorable. At the same time, PACE ridership has exceeded expectations, producing fare revenue, which also contributes to their favorable operating deficit. PACE is adding back significant service this month, so we do still expect expenses to increase and the operating deficit variance to decrease in the second half of the year. With the regional operating deficit favorable to budget by 8.1%, staff recommends a finding of insubstantial accordance with budget for the second quarter, CTA, Metra, PACE, ADA, and regional results. Next slide, please. And since our last update in June, the service boards have requisitioned an additional $81 million in relief funding. And as a region, we've now drawn down about 65% of the $3.5 billion total. Current financial results suggest that federal relief funding could continue to support operations into early 2026, followed by the projected annual operating shortfall of over $700 million, which we've been communicating. The proposed service board budgets to be submitted 2 months from now will provide a natural update to the timing and magnitude of that budget gap. Back to you, Mr. Chairman, for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? The amount of data we have is just amazing. And it does show progress. All right, so we need a motion in a second here. Director Groven moves that we adopt the item 7A, seconded by Director Melvin. With that, Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Sure. Director Carey?
Aye.
Dr. Colson? Dr. Fuentes?
Aye.
Dr. Gathing?
Aye.
Dr. Gorman?
Aye.
Dr. Groven?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Melvin?
Yes.
Dr. Rotundo?
Aye.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
We have 13 ayes.
Thank you. 7A is approved. Item 7B is the ordinance establishing estimates of funding amounts available to the service boards for 2025 through 2027, their operating budgets and the required recovery ratios for 2025, and the preliminary 2025 to 2029. It's hard to believe it's 29 capital program funding amounts. Bill Lackman, Brian Lohenberg, thank you all. Kevin?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and microphone. This is RTA Budget Manager and Treasurer Bill Lackman. I will be presenting the details of the operations funding allocations for 2025. Then RTA Capital Programs Manager Brian Lohenberg will present the capital funding picture. Given the time, we will both keep our comments relatively brief. Next slide, please. The proposed ordinance adopts the operations and capital funding amounts, or what we refer to as marks, for the 2025 budget and 5-year capital program. Setting the marks is a critical step in the RTA region's annual budget process. The RTA Act establishes September 15th as the date by which funding amounts for the upcoming year must be adopted. Action today, rather than at the September board meeting, will provide the amounts to the service boards 4 weeks earlier in the development of their budgets. The RTA Act further requires that the service boards develop budgets that are consistent with the approved funding amounts. These funding amounts will be supplemented as necessary by the remaining federal COVID relief funds. Next slide, please. After discussions with the service board finance teams, the RTA has applied the sales tax growth rates shown here to determine the service board operations funding levels in the budget and plan years, the right 3 bars on this chart. RTA sales tax receipts are expected to reach $1.7 billion this year and exceed $1.8 billion by 2027. Please note that we are reviewing the potential positive impact of recent state legislation on sales tax receipts beginning in 2025. And we also acknowledge concerns about inflation and recession that may have adverse impacts on the budget and plan years. Next slide, please. The recently approved state fiscal year 2025 budget again provided PTF, Public Transportation Fund, to be funded at the full 30% state match of the RTA sales tax and real estate transfer tax. In the state fiscal year 2025 budget, reduced fare reimbursement was increased by 10% to nearly $21 million, And state ADA paratransit funding was also increased by 10% to $10 million. Note that this state funding accounts for only a very small percentage of the costs of these vital programs. Approximately 5% of the cost of ADA paratransit service and 20% of the cost of reduced fares. The state budget also included $103 million of ASA and AFA financial assistance for debt service on RTA skip bonds. Next slide, please. This table shows the resulting amounts of 2025 RTA operations funding proposed for each service board compared to the current adopted 2024 budget. Due to continued RTA sales tax growth, the proposed RTA funding levels for the CTA, Metra, and PACE suburban service increased between 3.1 and 6.9%. Total funding for PACE regional ADA paratransit service is proposed to increase by 12.8% to $266 million due to increased ridership and contractor costs. In line with the service board funding growth, 2025 funding for the RTA agency is proposed to increase by $1.9 million from the 2024 budget. Next slide, please. The proposed ordinance also sets the required service board recovery ratios for the upcoming year, each proposed to be unchanged from the 2024 requirements. These reduced requirements are enabled by state legislation, which extended temporary recovery ratio relief through the 2025 budget year. Note that recovery ratio relief, temporary or permanent, does not provide funding for transit and therefore has no impact on either the timing or magnitude of the fiscal cliff. In the Consolidated Regional 2026-2027 two-year financial plan, the RTA will likely apply a region-level revenue credit in the recovery ratio calculation. We will be effectively self-disclosing our anticipated inability to meet the 50% recovery ratio requirement in 2026 and 2027. A similar credit will likely also be required to meet the ADA paratransit 10% budgeted recovery ratio requirement in these same years. Although federal relief funding remains authorized to be included in the calculations of recovery ratios, further legislative relief from the 50% regional recovery ratio requirement must remain a priority for the RTA and the service boards. This is due to reduced ridership and associated fare revenue, expanded interagency fare products, and broadened reduced fare programs. I will now return the presentation over to Brian for a discussion about the capital funding amounts. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Bill. Brian Lowenberg, Manager Capital Programs here. Let's first focus on the 2025 capital program. There are $1.06 billion available for capital projects. The federal funds are based on the federally approved Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and also include discretionary opportunities that the service boards are planning to pursue. State funds include PAYGO funding from the motor fuel tax, and RTA funding is made up of ICE or Innovation Coordination and Enhancement funds. Next slide, please. This chart shows how the capital funding from all sources is split amongst the service boards for 2025. CTA has approximately 58% of capital funds, or $617 million. Metra has about 35% of funds at $366 million, and PACE 7% of funds at $79 million. Next slide, please. Now let's review the funding over the 5-year time horizon by funding source. The 2025 to 2029 capital program has an estimated total of $5.63 billion. Federal formula funding represents 67% of available funds, and federal discretionary amounts to 8% of projected funds, totaling 75% from federal sources. As a note, federal discretionary ends up usually being a larger share of the program at the end of the year as more opportunities are realized. State funding represents 24% of the program, which comes from PAYGO funds, and RTA and local funds account for about 1% of the program. Next slide, please. On this chart, we're showing how capital funding from all sources is split amongst the service boards over the full 5-year program. CTA has a 59% share with $3.34 billion. Metra, a 34% split at $1.91 billion, and PACE 7% of funds at $379 million. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a second here to highlight two funding sources that represent the largest chunk of predictable annual funding. First, federal formula funds for marks for 2025 match the 2024 actuals, while out years show an increase of 1% per year. RTA has taken a conservative approach based on political uncertainty this fall for these marks. Second, state PAYGO funds from the motor fuel tax has seen an increase in the marks due to favorable gas tax receipts. Available PAYGO marks have increased nearly 20% for the 2025 to 2029 program compared to the initial 5 years. Annual funding is estimated at $270 million a year. Lastly, I wanted to remind the board that these two funding sources use the 2021 board-adopted performance-based allocation method. For the first time, all program years are allocated using this method, and more details about these methods can be found in the board memo. I'll turn it back to Bill to finish up things.
Thanks, Brian. Here's a snapshot of the budget. Sorry, next slide, please. Very good. Here's a snapshot of the budget calendar through the remainder of the year. Relevant board meeting dates are highlighted in brown. The RTA board adopted the budget call in May, setting up the budget development schedule. Today, we are recommending board adoption of the funding amounts. On September 27th, the service boards submit their proposed draft capital program project details. On October 11th, the service boards submit their proposed operating budgets, 2-year financial plans, and 5-year capital programs to the RTA before they enter the public hearing process. November 15th is the statutorily defined date for which the service boards to submit their adopted budgets to the RTA. On Friday, November 22nd, the RTA board meeting will feature presentations of the budgets and capital programs of each of the service boards. On December 19th, staff will present the consolidated regional budget and program for your adoption. This concludes our presentation. Brian and I are requesting board adoption of the funding amounts as we've presented them. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Anybody? Director Colson.
I think I'm missing something here. How are you able to fairly allocate public revenues to the service boards without some analysis of fair revenue projections? I know there's very little in here about fair projections.
So we are providing the funding. The fair revenue is system-generated revenue. So the RTA is responsible for estimating what the funding will be from government sources, and the service boards are responsible for projecting their system-generated revenue, including fair revenue.
So fair revenue is kind of irrelevant to what you're doing here. Is that fair to say?
Right. It's not a part of what we project for the service.
Because we're projecting what we estimate in terms of public funding. So the funding from state, federal, local sources in terms of those expected revenues, then they take that and look at their operations and estimate out ridership, and as a result, estimate what they predict fair revenue would be. And the ultimate, as we all know, has to come back with a balanced budget.
And if I may just add, that information is also going to be included in the operating budgets that the service boards are going to be submitting. They're going to have their, public hearings where we're all able to participate if we want to provide any feedback on that as well. So,
Dr. Yonan.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Again, just some of my ignorance on some of the federal discretionary. Obviously, we've hearing a lot about some of these earmarks or direct allocation to the CTA for some of the red line extension. So that's not in the federal discretionary, those numbers?
The CTA is expecting to program the federal award at their November board meeting, which would come to our December board for review. Usually they wait until it's closer to actually being awarded. So that's why it's not in the program yet.
Okay. But that would be under federal discretionary where you?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
And just to add for the two newer directors, we do have a pretty regular cadence of capital program amendments and updates, typically once a quarter, where we capture those, you see move around of monies, additions of monies, and that's really where those discretionary dollars get plugged into the program. And Brian alluded to that. It's sort of at the end of year true up, you see those numbers usually go up because those grants, essentially, those competitive grants are kind of realized and then they're plugged into the program.
Director Melvin, you have a question?
Just a quick question, Bill. You were talking about the reduced fare number. So is the total current number for reduced fare $100 million deficit?
Yeah.
And for ADA, it's $50 million deficit? Those are current numbers?
No, the ADA deficit's much in the magnitude of 200 million. So the 10 million is just about 5%.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? If not, how about a motion and a second to approve item 7B? Director Ross moves, seconded by Director Lewis. With that, Joey, would you take a roll call, please?
Dr. Carey?
Aye.
Dr. Colson?
Aye.
Dr. Fuentes?
Aye.
Dr. Gathing?
Aye.
Dr. Gorman?
Normal. Aye.
Dr. Groven?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Melvin?
Yes.
Dr. Otondo?
Aye.
Dr. Ross?
Aye.
Dr. Dr.
Yes.
Sager? Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes,
14 ayes.
thank you.
13 ayes, sorry.
And 7B is approved. Thanks, Bill, Brian, Kev, very much. All right, moving along. Items 7C through 7H are the approval of contract and expenditure items as they appear in your budget and board agenda packets. They include 7C as an ordinance authorizing state legislative consulting service contracts. Rob Nash is here if people have questions on that. 7D is an ordinance authorizing a consultant contract for creative services. 7E is approving a contract for Microsoft subscription and services. 7F is approving a contract for miscellaneous technology supplies. 7G is a contract for approval on an amendment for mobile devices and services. And 7H is the approval of travel expense reimbursements. Tina's here for 7D on the creative services if you have them. And Jerry and Kevin are here for 7E through 7G, the Microsoft subscriptions and services, tech supplies, and mobile devices and services. Any questions on these? If not, how about a motion to approve those items 7C through 7H? Director Carey moves, we approve those, seconded by Director Yonan. And with that, Joey, take a roll call, please. Secretary.
Dr. Carey?
Aye.
Dr. Colson?
Aye.
Dr. Fuentes?
Aye.
Dr. Gathing?
Aye.
Dr. Gorman?
Aye.
Dr. Groven?
Aye.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes.
Dr. Melvin?
Yes.
Dr. Otondo?
Aye.
Dr. Ross?
Aye.
Dr. Sager?
Yes.
Dr. Yonan?
Aye.
And Chairman Dillard?
Yes,
13
thank you
ayes.
very much. That item is approved, or those items are approved. Item 8 is new business. Any new business to come before the board? If not, we'll remind the board that the next meeting will be September 12th of 2024 at 9 o'clock in the morning here. And if there's no further business to come before the board, how about a motion and a second to adjourn? Director Melvin moves we adjourn. Director Gathing seconds. All those in favor say aye of adjournment. Aye.